After midnight, the small rules bend. Air moves before anything arrives, doors welcome what no one sees, and a bell remembers a hand that isn't there. Hey, glad you made it. We keep the volume low here. Before we start, do our 3 soft checks with me. Slow breath in, loosen your jaw, thumb on the table, click the quiet key. I tell quiet horror, real nights, real places, just the kind of minutes that hang around after the lights go out. Drop your city and local time in the comments so the night map grows another pin. If this keeps you company, wait till the video ends to subscribe, then tap the bell so the next file finds you. Tell me which detail stayed. 3 dead-of-night moments, a subway platform that breathes like a train is coming and never shows, a parking arm that lifts for an unseen car, and a church bell that rings once with the rope tied off. After midnight, Boston put away its face. Streetlights fell into long, patient ovals. A trash bag clung to a curb and wouldn't let go. Trains thinned until the schedule felt like a rumor kept alive by whoever needed one more ride. Down in the station, the platform air did what it always did in the quiet. It held still like a held breath. Elise stood 6 tiles back from the yellow line, just close enough to feel honest about waiting, far enough that her toes wouldn't lean without her permission. She worked late when the restaurant needed endings cleaned, endings folded, endings made ready for the morning shift that never thanked the midnight one. She breathed slow. She liked to hear the space around her settle. In places with rules, the body listens for rules to break. On the wall, a plastic sign promised next train. 4 minutes. The minute flicked down to 3 with bureaucratic certainty. Overhead, a green exit sign hummed like a bug caught in a jar. Somewhere down the tunnel, deep and far, air remembered how to move. It touched her ankle and left, nothing more than the soft shirt cuff of a breeze passing by a thought. There were 5 other people, but the platform arranged them so they didn't become a crowd. A nurse with tired shoulders and the careful gait of someone who had walked around too many sleeping bodies. A student with a backpack that hung like a confession. A man in a suit not built for him, the sleeves were the kind a thrift store assigns. 2 teenage boys pretending to be louder than they felt. The CCTV monitor above the map showed the tunnel like a page that hadn't been written yet. Elise watched it the way some people watch a window, in case the night decided to deliver anything. A train? Yes. A person who should not be walking on the ballast? Yes. Anything that makes the world pick up a pen and sign its name. The smallest sound carries in a place like that. A flip of paper, a hair leaving a coat, a coin deciding to move from one pocket to another. She heard it without turning, one of the boys rolling a quarter along his knuckles, letting the metal whisper as it travelled. He watched his own hands like they belonged to someone who had agreed to teach him something. The quarter dropped. It didn't ring on tile. It made the soft clack of edge against rubber shoe sole and stayed. Both boys laughed at the restraint in the sound. 2 minutes! The numbers didn't care about belief. They never do. Then the platform breathed. It wasn't wind at first. It was a pressure change. The ears know before the skin does. Elise rolled her jaw without thinking, the way you do in elevators that remember to stop. A gust that wasn't a gust pulled along the tunnel and puffed the paper notices into small flags. The nurse looked down the line out of old habit, for headlamps, for a glare building, for the metallic promise that air makes when it climbs the rails ahead of mass. The CCTV showed nothing. The boys stilled, the suit reached up to touch his tie as if to prove it could move. A second later, a full wind ran the platform from right to left. It was polite but certain. It lifted the fringe on Elise's scarf and smoothed it flat again, as if to say, "There you are." Dust motes revealed themselves and drew straight lines nobody had asked for. The backpack student closed his eyes and smiled, because some people are still wired to trust the relief that comes when a tunnel tells you a train is near. He opened his eyes to make sure the belief wasn't foolish. The CCTV screen held its blank throat, no headlamps, no movement, just the white stripe where the ballast began, empty and exact. The 1 minute became arriving, and the speaker gave a soft click that meant it was thinking about speaking. Nothing came. The arriving cleared. 1 minute returned with the shrug of a commuter who'd promised nothing. Elise felt a simple thing arrive inside her chest, the smallest pebble dropped into a cup of water. It wasn't fear, it was a concentration, the kind the body goes to when a number doesn't add right. In places that count, airports, hospitals, train stations, the clocks don't lie. When they do, the world gets brighter at the edges just long enough to make sense or to refuse to. She put her hand into the pocket where she kept the little spiral notebook for lists and hours and recipes that felt worth stealing from the shift. Her thumb found a fold she knew. This was not the place to write, but sometimes a hand needs paper, like lungs need air. The nurse spoke, a low thing meant for air more than for anyone. A single-syllable audit of reality. The platform breathed again. This time, the wind had a rhythm. It arrived in 6 slow seconds and left in 6, like a long exhale after something heavy had been carried and set down. The green exit sign hummed at a different pitch for those seconds. Its casing asked itself quietly if it was meant to be a sail. A flyer for a missing cat fluttered against the corkboard and held on, clawing the thumbtacks with its corners. The quarter on the boy's shoe rolled half an inch toward the track and thought better of it. The boy looked at it as if it had spoken. Elise stepped 1 tile forward. Not to be close to danger, to be fair. If a train came out of its hole, she did not want to be the person who saw it late. She felt the don't in her calf muscles, the one the body gives you when it wants to keep blood inside. She stayed where she was. In that mild moment, the omniscient truth, the one only the night and the rails knew, stood in the tunnel like a tall figure just outside the ring of light. It had nothing to say yet. It was checking its pockets, choosing which hand to use. The countdown vanished. The screen went blank for a single beat, like a held breath caught between sentences, then lit with delay. The speaker clicked again and offered 2 bees in a jar. No words, just a summoning of electricity. The nurse turned her head toward the tunnel mouth and tilted it the way you do when you're trying to hear something beneath other things. The boys stopped being boys. The suit looked at the stairs as if upstairs were an entirely different species of problem. Elise watched the CCTV. She didn't blink. She liked to watch machines before they decide. It flicked. 1 frame held the tunnel as always, and the next frame painted a smear of moving air that looked like speed drawn with a finger in fog. She couldn't have said why it looked like that. It just did. Wind doesn't walk, but it can leave footprints. Something changed in the silence then. Not sound, not light. Weight. The platform took a slight bow beneath them, the way a stage does under an actor who knows where to stand. The tiles made that sound tiles make when grout gives half a word and holds the rest. The nurse's hand went to the pole beside her. The backpack student opened his mouth and closed it around a letter he couldn't find. The boys leaned toward and away from the track at the same time, rocking into themselves like boats tied short. Elise watched the yellow line, the one that says stay, without the cruelty of saying no. A set of ripples travelled along its paint from right to left, small, like a memory of footsteps half an inch tall. Up the tunnel, a light bloomed, not a headlamp, a thinner thing like the reflection of one. It came and went the way dreams practice being real. The CCTV picked it up as a lighter grey that lived for a breath and passed on. The sign above them admitted defeat and cleared to a single hyphen, the universal symptom of machines that have decided to stop guessing. When the wind left, it did not leave all at once. It drew back in stitched pieces as if the platform wore a coat someone carefully unbuttoned. The papers fell flat. The quarter rolled back to exactly where it had been without gaining a full spin. The exit sign's hum returned to its original wrong note. The nurse relaxed her hand and discovered she had pressed a half moon into her palm. The boys laughed too loudly and were ashamed of it. The suit decided to return to being a suit. Elise did not move. In quiet rooms, moving too soon feels like choosing the wrong number on a test with only one question. She looked into the dark until the dark gave her nothing in return. Then she let her breath out, slow, like she was fogging a window no one would read. A different train arrived 10 minutes later, announced by a different gust that carried the honest smell of brakes and hot dust. Doors opened, people moved, schedules recovered their pride. The nurse sat under a map and let the car sway, wash the crease from her brow. The boys told the story wrong to each other on purpose, because that's how you make a thing safe. The suit looked at his reflection in the window and decided he was the kind of person who would laugh about this by morning. Elise slid onto the plastic seat and carried the platform with her, the way you carry the shape of a doorway you almost walked through. The wind had moved twice with purpose and once with memory. And she was not the only one who had felt the little bow of the floor, that acknowledgement, that... what? Respect? Warning? An old choreography repeating its single step for whoever stayed late enough to see it. At the next stop, she was the only one who looked back down the length of the car toward the tunnel. She did not expect to see anything. She only wanted the tunnel to know it had been seen. Softly, because the night respects soft things, the story continued, even though the car doors shut and the mechanism took them forward. What happened next would not be louder, it would only be closer. The platform does not end at its edges, it travels with the people who believed it. And with one of them, Elise, it was already riding home. Elise's apartment liked to keep score. The radiator ticked when it felt alone. The fridge hummed at 2 volumes depending on whether it wanted attention. The hallway light outside her door flickered when someone walked by, even if no one did. Old buildings do that, keep their proof handy, not to win arguments but to demonstrate that time has hands. She let herself in, slid the chain across with a sound that satisfied because it was supposed to. She set her bag down and didn't turn on the main light, only the lamp by the window that threw a circle on the small table. She called a table because there are only so many words for surfaces that hold up our lives. On that circle lay what she wanted: blank paper, a pen, a square of tile she had brought home when the landlord redid the bathroom upstairs and left a box by the curb. She had cleaned the tile and kept it because she liked the way grout keeps distance honest. Alone, the tile didn't nag. It simply proved. She wrote 1239 platform wind. She had learned, through a lifetime of small, quiet contradictions, that details kept their shape when they were carried this way. She wrote 2 gusts, plus 1 pressure change, and underlined the plus with a line that did not wiggle. She drew a tiny rectangle for the monitor and shaded the frame that held the smear of moving air. She made a dot for each person present, not to keep them, just to respect that nights are shared, even by people who will never meet again. The building offered its reply, a neighbour's door whispering shut, a shoe stepping 2 steps and deciding to stop, the wet sound of a pipe remembering its own elbows. She waited for something that often came when she wrote after midnight, clarity, or at least a sentence that did not lie to itself. Sometimes nothing came. Tonight, something did. Air moved across her bare wrist from kitchen to window. Not enough to scold a candle. Enough to be named. Her window was closed. The kitchen window was closed. The vent above the stove had never taken a breath in the entire time she'd lived there. She stood and put her hand flat to the tile square on the table. The stone was warmer than it had any right to be. She knew its temperature because she had the habit of knowing. She touched it every time she came home from a late shift to add something to the quiet log no one would ever see. In her chest, the pebble dropped earlier sent a second ripple. She did not say anything clever aloud, she only listened. The hallway light outside her door flickered once, no footsteps, no voices, just a pale nod of presence in a shared space. She walked to the door and set her ear to it. People always picture the ear as the listener, but a door has its own, a surface ear that translates air into wood, wood into sound, sound into stories we aren't meant to have. The hall gave her nothing but the light. She eased the chain off and opened the door a slice. The hall was a painted river that forgot how to flow. The bulb overhead warmed itself to duty and then calmed down. The carpet held no fresh marks except the long arcs it always kept from other nights, other decisions about groceries and laundry, and fights put down as if they were packages that might be picked up again later. On the opposite wall, the framed fire escape map wore a wrinkle along its bottom edge. A small wrinkle, a thing you'd never see unless you were the kind of person who had started watching Wind for its handwriting. Elise crossed and smoothed the corner with one finger. The paper held the memory of being lifted and asked by air to become a flag. She closed her door and set the chain back, partly because chains are rituals, and partly because ritual teaches a body to choose itself over everything else. Back at the table, she balanced the tile on 2 bottle caps and slid her little kitchen scale under it because small experiments keep you company. The scale read 1,000 kias as if it were proud to be that simple. She waited. Air tosses carry dust and scent. They do not change mass. If the number changed, she would laugh at herself for not trusting physics. If the number didn't change, she would laugh at herself for trying to make the world play along. Either way, the joke would land softly. The night was a patient audience. She heard it before the scale did, a held breath change, a hush that wasn't silence so much as a pause. The numbers on the scale trembled as scales do when a room's size, 1,000 blinked to 0.997 and then back to 1,000. It could be nothing, it could be everything, it could be the kind of everything that only means keep looking. She wrote tile 1,00997, 1,000 and underlined draft. She circled the question mark like a ring put back on a finger by someone who still isn't sure. The phone on the counter, a cordless that had outlived 2 apartments by sheer refusal, sprang its backlight without ringing. That sometimes happened when a neighbour's unit answered a call. It made a little sea-green rectangle that looked like a door opened somewhere that was not here. She went to the window and touched the glass. Cold, as expected. She reached for the latch and didn't open it. The body knows there are nights you do not invite inside, even if the inside has already decided to come as far as the wrist and the scale. The refrigerator clicked off. The apartment swallowed the hum with a contentment that said it had been fed. Elise returned to the table and put one more thing on the tile. A single subway ticket she had kept in a coat pocket for no reason, besides the mild satisfaction of paper the size of a thought. She placed it so its long edge lined exactly with the tile's grout line. Alignment is a language too. Misalignments talk. Her kitchen clock, the cheap round one that could be either a weapon or a joke depending on who got there first, ticked into 1:13 and asked nothing more. The hallway light flicked again. Again, no footsteps. She thought of the platform, the breath, the bow, the ripple on the yellow paint. She thought of the second train that arrived as if the first had never been written. She thought of how a night can be a single hallway you walk twice and somehow land somewhere else. On the table, the ticket moved, not by much, a whisper length. The long edge that had lain flush with grout slid a hair left, enough to make the edge announce itself to the eye. Elise did not startle. She leaned in and looked for what every sane person looks for when objects decide they're tired of being obedient. The slope. There wasn't one. The tile sat level on its caps. She placed her fingertip on the ticket's corner and felt not the after-slick of a breeze, not the dry, static pull of plastic, just a temperature. Warmer than tile, warmer than her finger. She removed her hand and let the ticket keep its small new truth. Then she did something that would sound strange to someone who hadn't been on that platform. She smiled. Not because she liked it. Because the world had an argument to make and she was finally listening. Out in the hall, the green glow of the exit sign hummed through the door like a tuning fork. She set her pen down. The next thing would happen whether she wrote it or not. A platform breath can learn the rooms of the people who noticed it, and some rooms, given a chance, breathe back. Morning did its good, ordinary work. Elise slept honest sleep, which is to say, not much, but enough. Daylight turned last night into a story without claws. The tile sat where it had, the ticket kept its new line, the scale remembered 0 like a vow. At work, steam rode the kitchen and the snap of a towel meant the same thing it always did. Reality stayed when checked. That's all anyone asks. She told no one, not because she worried about how it would sound, but because some things spoil in air that is not night. She kept her voice for hours with fewer hands in them. By the second night, the platform had shifted inch by inch from a strange minute to a place she expected to explain itself. That's the trap hidden in curiosity. The quiet kind looks like patience until it turns into faith. She made a choice. She went back to the station not because she needed to, but because you don't walk away from a door after it opens itself. She arrived earlier, before the last honest trains quit. She took the same square of tile with her, wrapped in a scarf she'd been meaning to wash, along with the little scale in a tote that had learned to keep secrets. On the platform, she picked a different spot. Not the same tile count, not the same angle. Superstitions deserve respect, but they deserve witnesses too. She placed the tile back from the yellow line, inconspicuous as a lunch, and set the ticket on it, long edge to grout, the way you might set a place at a table for someone whose name you can't bring yourself to say. If anyone looked, she'd say she was testing a camera filter. If anyone asked, she'd invite them to watch. People came and went. Doors opened and swallowed. The countdowns counted like people who enjoy their job too much. Wind obeyed trains with the humility of a creature that loves being told what to do. Nothing misbehaved, which told her something. Whatever last night had been, it wasn't a trick that liked the crowd. It was late again when the air performed its long thought. 12:37 this time, the clock's colon blinking an agreeably slow heartbeat. The platform drew itself long. Sound scrolled out of the tunnel as if printed on paper. First the suspicion of movement, then the private conversation of rails, then that low, throat sound steel makes when it remembers it is stronger than everything around it. The CCTV showed the mouth of the tunnel lit by nothing. The counter promised 2 minutes. The boys weren't there, nor the suit, nor the nurse. A janitor with a cart he did not seem to love paused to pick something that wasn't there off the floor and put it in a bag, because that's what you do. Elise didn't move her feet. She held still everywhere except her eyes, which travelled the platform the way you trace the outline of a stranger's hand without touching it. The wind arrived, first as pressure, then as decision. The tile on the platform didn't rattle. It didn't have to. The ticket slid its whisper's length and then settled with a matter-of-factness that made please and thank you feel unnecessary. The scale blinked 0.997 and came back to 1,000. The CCTV flicked its one false headlamp again, on, off, the way a place raises a question and refuses to be graded on the answer. The sign clicked into arriving, then back to 1 minute, like a child pressing a doorbell twice to make sure it works. Down the far end, a whisper of litter lifted into a synchronized nod. A plastic bag, a receipt, a leaf that had followed someone in and never remembered to leave. They rose, not high, just enough to become sentences. The janitor saw it and didn't see it. His eyes were on his hands. Elise saw it and held her breath as if hers were connected to what the platform was trying to say. The wind stopped like a held note deciding it had been heard. And then, because knights prefer to underplay their hands, the platform gave her one human sound, not a voice, not even a word. The faint metallic strike of two metal edges somewhere down the tunnel, knocking once in coincidence, but landing like intention. A sound not of danger, a sound of you called? If the story wanted to be a jump scare, it would have picked that moment to try, but it wanted to be true, and truth has manners. It let the sound live alone and did not elaborate. The next train, the honest one, came 3 minutes later, and by then Elise's tile had decided it was just a tile again. She took it back into the tote. She did not bring the scale, she left it, so she could test something she didn't yet know how to name. On the car home, the windows turned themselves into mirrors and gave her face back with a slightly kinder border. She looked at the outline of her head against the dark and tried on the sentence. I think the platform remembered something. It fit. It didn't persuade, but it didn't need to. Some sentences are coats, some are rings, some are just the right temperature of tea when your hands don't know what to do. At home, she set the tile down where it always lived and the ticket where it had been moved. The hallway light said nothing. The door chain said good, in the small, satisfying way metal does when it meets its own other half. And then, it had to be then, because some beats have their own metronomes, the apartment breathed inward like a person about to speak. The kitchen window latch, closed, twitched a degree without unlocking. The cheap clock on the wall lifted its second hand a fraction, then carried on as if humility were a virtue. Elise's hair lifted at the crown and settled. On the table, the ticket slid again, and this time it didn't stop where she could pretend the slope had invited it. It stopped flush with the tile's edge, as if it had been brought to the door and asked to rest its shoulder against it. That's when she realized she had been polite too long. "Okay," she said. A single word that meant yes. She spoke it to the room, to the tile, to the pressure that had learned her wrist, and now learned her insistence. The room relaxed exactly one hair, which is to say, it heard. When a place replies, you don't argue, you learn its grammar, and then you dare to ask a harder question. There's a moment in certain nights when leaving feels like betrayal, and staying feels like invitation. Elise knew the shape of it from other, smaller things. Walks at 3 a.m. that decide to become 5 minutes longer. Music. You let play one track past when you should sleep, because the next song knows your name in a different voice. She did not go back to the station on the third night. She didn't need an audience, not even a silent one, made of tile and timetables. She needed a room that could witness how simple an exchange could be without building a story around it. The apartment had already agreed to be that room. She set the tile on the table, she set the ticket on the tile, she set a glass of water beside it and filled it halfway. The engineer's habit she never learned but respected. Water tells truth if asked simply. She taped a thread to the ticket's far corner and let the thread hang over the edge. If air moved, if pressure gathered, if the apartment wanted to move a light thing without breaking anything else, here was an invitation that did not demand obedience. Once, she said, to the room, and the dark and the square of tile that now felt a little like an altar. Do it once if there's a reason, leave it if there isn't. It was the opposite of a dare. It was permission. The hallway light flickered and did not stay. The window latch stayed where it was. The fridge hummed at its lower volume, the one that sounds like a throat clearing before a joke. Minutes went the way minutes go when you're being fair to them, one after another, not judged, just counted. Please and thank you hung in the air without needing to be said. She let her shoulders down. She let the night be big. When it happened, it was exactly the size of yes. The thread lifted, not much, a cat's whisker, and the ticket rotated a quarter inch, a tidy turn like a coin too tired for a full flip. The water in the glass drew one lazy oval and came back to flat with a decorum she admired. The scale, which she had not placed this time, complained in its absence by being unnecessary. The hallway light stayed off, which meant the building chose to let the moment be private. Thank you, she said, because manners cost less than disbelief. But the night was not done. Not with noise, with proof. In the quiet after, somewhere beneath the floorboards, a sound arrived that didn't belong to plumbing or neighbours, or the 1,000 small bodies apartments have to manage. 2 edges of metal, distant, knocked once, exactly the sound from the tunnel. A short, light response, not closer, not louder, just equal. Like call and answer, written by hands that didn't hold pens anymore. It wasn't communication, not in the way people mean when they promise to keep in touch. It was recognition. The room knew her name, the way a place learns the weight of a person who returns. She stood in that feeling and let her chest learn it, because bodies remember with better fidelity than thoughts do. And here is where the story could become a caution, and it will not. Nothing demanded, nothing chased, nothing took. The apartment did not ask for a window, the platform did not ask for blood, the tunnel did not whisper a schedule only she could read. Horror has teeth, it also has hands. Tonight, it chose to touch her shoulder and not her throat. Elise slept with the chain on and the tile cooling, and the ticket turned to a position that would look accidental to anyone else. Morning came like a witness. She wrote yes in her notebook without explaining it to herself, after the world continued to do its job. You could take the story and shake it like a snow globe, and the flakes would land in the shapes you expect: work, sleep, questions, kindnesses. She still stood back from the yellow line. She still hated being late. She still folded napkins like geometry mattered. And yet, on a late shift a week later, a new waitress told her a dumb small story about a dumb small thing, a bathroom fan that clicked on by itself once at 2 a.m. and wouldn't click off until she spoke aloud and said, "Please." She laughed at herself and said it was nothing. Elise wanted to say, nothing is not the absence of a thing. Sometimes it's the politest version of something. She did not say it. She said, "Yeah, I get that," and meant it like a toast. On a train home 2 nights after that, the car slowed before a tunnel mouth and paused long enough for the lights to take a breath. The wind inside the car moved down the aisle from right to left, as if a door had opened beneath them. People didn't notice. Elise did. She looked at the dark and didn't expect a headlamp. She expected a reply. She didn't get one. That was fine. Not all nights talk. Not all names get used every time. She went home and set the tile back on the bottle caps and let the ticket live alongside the grocery list and a pen that always lied about how much ink it had. The scale stayed in a cupboard. The glass took water the way glasses take anything. Ready. There were other nights, an earthquake in miniature, a shelf tremble that didn't belong to traffic, a song on the radio at a friend's house that skipped exactly once when the lyric landed on the word arrive, the hallway light that began to save its flicker for people who would smile at it rather than swear. The world accrues small proofs the way people accrue scars, gently, without inventory, until one day your body tells a longer story than your mouth does. If you want a monster, you won't find it here. If you need a rule, here is one. After midnight, air keeps the appointments we make with it. We promise not to stare. It promises not to push. We meet where respect lives and leave, with all our blood where it belongs. In the station, once in a while, a gust runs the platform from right to left and makes the missing cat flyer breathe. The countdown claims arriving for a heartbeat, then 1 minute, then dignified silence as if the machine has remembered which story it is allowed to tell and which one you have to earn. And sometimes, on nights with the right kind of quiet, 2 small metal edges touch in the dark with a sound like now. Elise hears it. She puts her hand to the tile on her table wherever she is, even if she's miles away in a different room, and she feels the cool hold of stone and believes something that isn't asking to be believed, that a place can learn your name and keep it like a secret and never once use it against you. That is not comfort. That is not threat. That is the truth that came up the tunnel in the shape of moving air and decided to stop a step short of becoming a face. That is the horror that lets you sleep because it has manners. Tonight, if your room remembers how to breathe, you do not have to name it. Just stand 6 tiles back from whatever line is in front of you and count to 6, 1 for each second of wind that belongs to what does not need to arrive to prove it exists. Then say, okay, the way Elise did, soft, as permission, as gratitude, as witness. After midnight, Phoenix kept its heat the way a hand keeps the memory of a rope, faint burn, stubborn grip. The 5-deck garage at 3rd and Fillmore wore that memory in its concrete. It didn't glow. It held. Sodium lamps turned everything the color of old limes. The stairwells smelled like a polite fight between lemon cleaner and metal coins. Far off, an air unit lifted its shoulders, set them down, lifted again. On level 4, heat ticked inside the side panel of a white van, like a cooling oven deciding whether to forget. Ava liked this hour because it believed in hinges. She had a booth with glass on 3 sides, a counter the exact height of her elbow, and a row of little green indicators that told the truth more often than people did. Her sweatshirt cuffs were chewed soft from thinking. A hair tie kept her ponytail from having opinions. She had a pen that never made a scene, a roll of receipt paper with a tidy cardboard core, and a drawer that closed with a sound that said, enough. Night attendants learn a posture. It isn't military. It's the body's way of saying I'm here, and nothing that happens is a surprise, even if it is. Ava had that posture. She stood when she didn't have to. She sat only when the building sat, which is to say, rarely. The city beyond the garage moved at a low tide. 1 late bus, a motorcycle measuring a street, a freight horn so far away it sounded like a thought about a horn. The sky had no stars. It had a dome of heat that did not care what people named it. At 2:53 a.m., the place held 5 cars. Ava knew them the way you know the contents of your fridge even with the door shut. A red Miata, top intact on 2B, a beige Camry with a new bumper, an old Story on 3A, the white van on 4C, a stack of carpet rolls like sleeping seals visible behind the crazed tint, 2 rental SUVs on 5D, parked straight enough to smell like contracts. She knew which owner would be back before dawn by the kind of work they did. She liked being right about it. Night people keep small scores. Her monitors showed the 4 angles that mattered: the lane itself with its black loop slice across the concrete, the white arm and its rubber cradle, the plate camera that blinked like a shy eye, the corner of her own booth where, if she leaned wrong, her face would remind her not to. The induction loop under the lane didn't show at all, only the sealant line that filled the cut, a rectangle, the colour of old licorice. A loop is just a field in wire, a quiet question waiting for metal. It doesn't ask for thanks, it asks for proof. She refilled the receipt printer. She aligned the stapler because objects learn how to behave by being shown. She touched the cabinet door with her fingertips just once, the way you touch a dog's back to let it know you're behind it. Then she tried the coffee the machine called coffee. It tasted like a rumour that wanted to be nice. She drank it anyway. Some rituals work on you because you agree to be worked on. The first sound came the way real things do, small, honest, not seeking credit. A soft click from inside the gate cabinet, deep and centred, as if a coin had flipped to heads behind a wall. The loop had felt something. It had told the board knew enough to trust, told the relay to think about being brave. The motor in the arm housing gave a low inhale, a sound like a person about to ask a polite question. Ava's eyes went to the lane before the screen. Screens are good gossip. Lanes are the event. Empty. A rectangle of lamplight. A cigarette butt flattened into a comma 3 feet before the cut. The kind of comma a board lobbyist makes with a shoe when the roof keeps the rain out. The concrete wore oil like faint bruises from 100 cars. The booth glass threw her a transparent ghost. She changed her angle so it would not. The arm rose, not the hard jerk of a tired hinge, the smooth arc of a thing proud of itself. The white bar lifted through the air and held at shin height, like a person who has knocked and is listening for you to cross a room. Ava did not move. She watched dust at the edge of the sealant ridge lift and lay back down in a single, neat breath, the way a cat's fur shows a passing hand without deciding to shed. The loop active tile glowed green on her monitor, 1 beat late. The plate camera snapped a frame and saved a perfect picture of nothing. It snapped another because someone in a clean office had once instructed it to do 4. It saved 2 more, obedient to the idea of work. The arm finished its rise and held at full. The green open lamp brightened just a hair, as if a current had found a better path. The booth clock clicked itself into 2:54, proud of the second hand for finding somewhere to go. Ava didn't talk into any microphone. She didn't say what the hell or really. She let the wind that wasn't wind move the booth's corner dust into a diagonal and back. She put 3 fingers on the glass where the moth liked to test itself and felt the faint transfer of her own temperature. She looked at the lane. The lane looked back the way rooms do, with rules, not eyes. The loop let go. The little green tile on the monitor cooled to grey. The relay in the cabinet spoke its 2-note syllable, permission withdrawn, and the arm lowered as if braced by hands that cared about it. The rubber lip took the bar with a private kiss. The green open lamp kept its glow for a count of 1 and returned to regular green. On level 3, the Camry alarm did its reflex. 2 notes like, hey, hey, The wakeful reflex of a car that once had a reason and kept it. The sound decided it was unnecessary and slept. The stairwell door whispered. Footsteps stood on the edge of happening and did not exist. An elevator somewhere tested a brake and remembered which floor it loved. Ava raised her eyebrows at nobody. She shifted her weight to the other foot. She made no note. She watched. A person who writes too soon makes the world decide too early. The building would choose to repeat, or it would choose to forgive itself. It repeated. This time she heard the ramp first, the soft comb of rubber over ridges, then a hush, as if the sound had reconsidered its journey. The cabinet clicked again, the indrawn breath of a plate lifter who'd decided to be useful. The motor in the arm housing hummed an even line. The bar lifted through nothing, paused at shin height for 3 steady heartbeats, then committed to full up. The plate camera did its duty and caught another clean lane full of clean air. Dust at the cut made the shallow arc of a bumper line and settled like good manners. Ava let herself smile, not at ghosts, not at fear, at competence. The system wasn't flailing, it wasn't panicking, it wasn't playing dead fish. It was making choices with the kind of precision you use when a room has taught you to be quiet. She slid open the little side window 2 inches and set a styrofoam cup, half full of water, on the concrete where the arm shadow fell when the bar was down. If the air moved, it wouldn't have to prove itself to her. It could prove itself to the meniscus. Water tells truth when asked in a small voice. The next rise wrote 1 ring on the cup, faint and perfect. A breath's worth, not a fan, not a draft. A ring that arrived, travelled, thinned, and called itself finished. Ava slid the window shut. She felt the booth's air find its shape again around her shoulders like a shirt being honest. On the screen, the loop active tile stayed green for 8 seconds. 8 can be a long time when you're holding something above the ground for no one. The arm did not wobble. The bar did not twitch. Midnight machines have a way of telling you exactly how much dignity they own. Ava stepped into the lane, careful where she placed her sneakers. She touched the rubber lip with the backs of her fingers, cool, powdered with the light dust of a place that makes exits for a living. On the right side of the cradle, the dust wore a thin crescent, the way a book's edge begins to brighten where thumbs live. She pressed her thumb and lifted it, leaving a small, clean oval. She didn't bother pretending to herself that the oval mattered. It mattered to her. That is enough at this hour. Luis came past on his round. Night security guards move like metronomes with pockets. He palmed the glass with 2 fingers and a grin that asked a question but didn't require an answer. She tipped her chin. He kept going. Their friendship was made of chin tips and the exchange of coffee at averages you could graph. The intercom to the pedestrian gate tapped its own relay once, a polite thop. The noise a metal plate makes when it decides to factor into a story. The red in-use LED woke, held, dimmed, no hiss, no voice. A throat cleared behind a wall and politely left the room. Ava lifted the lane phone to her ear, not to call, just to listen to the dial tone, the honest ocean you get when a line has nothing else to be. She put it down and set a quarter by the sealant cut, not as bait. As witness. Money knows doors. The next rise rotated the quarter half a face and set it back exactly where it had been, heads where tails had been, the edge still riding the same imperceptible ridge in the concrete. The water ring returned, then forgot itself. The loop stayed loyal for 9 seconds this time. The plate camera saved 4 more pictures of a lane that had nothing to say for itself besides present. Time does what it does at this hour. It doesn't pass. It settles. The city outside became a low choir. The booth glass kept her reflection only as a guideline, not a portrait. The moth discovered the plexiglass again, made a small grey comma of insistence, and fell like a polite idea dropped on purpose. It's easy to say she felt watched. Ava did not. What her body knew was cooler and more particular. The skin above the vein on the inside of her wrist cooled, the way it does when a room steps closer without meaning harm. The cool made no argument. It took no blood. It simply announced itself as a temperature change in a square penny of skin. That's the kind of honesty you either learn to hear or you never do. She kept her voice. She kept her manners. "If you're passing," she said to the lane, not into a speaker, not into a recording, just into the air that had proved it could carry instructions. "Do it clean. Don't pause." She said it the way you tell a dog to stay off the couch when you leave the room. Not punishment, not a threat. A boundary supplied with love. The next rise came shorter. The arm lifted without the little think at shin height. The loop glowed green for 6 seconds and let go. The cup hardly remembered. The quarter stayed still. The relay inside the cabinet spoke its neat syllable, and then went quiet like a person with good timing. One level up, someone set down a box too hard and said sorry to no one. The elevator doors met in the middle and thought about each other. A person in a hoodie took the long way between cars to feel alone longer and changed their mind near a stairwell light because light has a way of winning arguments late. Ava leaned her elbows on the counter. She didn't write. She didn't need a log, she had a room. She made sure the stapler was square because squaring things calms the part of the mind that chases corners. The lane breathed with discipline. The arm behaved with grace. The building, for once, liked its own rules. At 3:02 a.m., a pair in a dented Civic squeezed laughter into lane 6 and paid exact. The arm over there did what arms do, up, pause, down. Ava gave the driver a receipt, and the driver gave her, "Bless you," because joy is contagious in machines that work. When the Civic left, the garage took a breath like a choir bench, losing 2 bodies. A truck downshifted outside like a baritone clearing its throat. The quarter thought about rolling and decided not to. The white bar waited in its cradle. The moth, tired of dying, rested at the corner of the plexi with its wings folded like the memory of a prayer. Ava stood instead of sitting to meet the next minute standing. When you stand, you tell the room, "I am equal to you." You tell yourself, "My legs belong to me." You tell the night, "I'm here." The click came back, the loop, the inhale, the arc, the quiet ring in the cup, the clean landing, the precise intervals of a thing that understands how not to be rude. Nothing asked for blood, nothing asked for noise, it asked for courtesy. Ava could do that. Ava was built for that. Above everything else, the building's long, flat face wore the light of its own late hour, and the late hour behaved like a neighbor, present, careful, unafraid to knock. Quiet hours teach the body new instruments. In a kitchen, it's the hiss that means water has just decided to be steam. In a hospital, it's the breath behind a curtain that says a person you love is still here. In a garage, it's the pitch of a relay and the way air rearranges itself when a door you can't see has remembered your name. Ava set the booth the way a person smooths a tablecloth before company. The stapler squared to the counter's edge. The receipt printer pulled straight, no swagger in the cable. A pen laid parallel to the glass, tip away from her so it could cool. She didn't believe these gestures made machines kinder. She believed they made her kinder to the machines. Kindness is contagious even in places built from concrete. The water came next. She slid the little window open 2 inches, let the warm night lay a palm on her cheek, and set a styrofoam cup on the lane just inside the reach of the arm when it slept. half full, enough weight to stay honest, light enough to register air. Meniscus smooth as a held breath. She closed the window and watched her reflection take its place again, as if she'd never left. The first rise after that was as well-mannered as a bow at a church door. Inside the cabinet, a soft click. On the monitor, loop active. In the air, the low hum of a motor that has learned the difference between effort and strain. The white bar lifted, paused at shin height as if remembering last night's courtesy, then finished the motion to full. The cup drew one thin ring, so faint you could mistake it for a lie, until it found the wall and went flat again. An honest little signature, not a flourish. Ava let herself smile without showing teeth. It was a private smile, the kind you can keep working behind. The plate camera did what it had been told by someone in a bright office long ago. Snap, 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 snap. 4 photographs of empty lane, good exposure, blue-tinted, each stamped with the time-like neat handwriting. Somewhere on 3, the Camry sighed into itself. Somewhere on 5, a rental SUV tugged at a cooling seam and decided not to complain. She didn't speak to the lane. Not yet. She stepped into it, careful of the sealant cut, and touched the rubber cradle with the back of her fingers. Cool, slightly dusty, not from neglect, but from life. A place where rubber kisses, home kisses rubber again, and leaves it clean. On the right edge of the cradle, a pale crescent showed where dust had been swept by the same shape, again and again, the way hands brighten banisters. She pressed her thumb just beside it, leaving a small, clean oval that meant nothing and everything at once. Then she went back inside because doorways prefer you on one side. The arms settled. The green open lamp softened and returned to its ordinary glow. The loop tile faded to grey as if washing its face. The moth at the plexiglass made a slow, baffled comma and fell back into punctuation. Ava stood instead of sitting. Standing told the room she could stand as long as it could. Then came the intercom's throat clear, a single relay thock at the pedestrian gate, the red, in-use LED brightening, holding, dimming, with no hiss, no voice. She looked at it on the little inset monitor above her lane feed. Stainless plate, black talk button, the kind of hardware that has the integrity to look plain. She lifted her own talk and pressed without speaking, counted a breath, let go. The LED trailed 1 second, exactly like before. Rituals keep you from thinking the world forgot you. They also keep you from pretending it owes you anything. On the lane, she placed a quarter. Not mid-cut. Just past the sealant line, edge on a tiny ripple in the concrete, so slight that a breath would roll the coin a whisker and guilt would stop it. Money is fluent in thresholds. She wanted a translator that wouldn't lie. It answered gently. The bar rose, the cup wrote its circle. The quarter turned one neat half and set itself back almost exactly where it had been, heads where tails had been, the edge still flirting with the ripple, as if it had been taught politeness at home. The monitor didn't blush. The loop held 8 beats and quit like a hymn, done right. The cabinet whispered its syllable, now, and fell quiet. Luis drifted by the way night guards drift, sound in the keys, silence in the boots. He tapped the glass with 2 knuckles, the affection of a brother not related to you. "All good? Friendly?" she said. He grinned. "Friendly pays better than spooky." He kept moving. He had the aura of a man whose job was to keep fights from starting rather than to win them. After he went, the world rearranged small pieces to reassure itself it could. Far down on level 1, a skateboard clacked once and then remembered the sign. Somewhere a door didn't slam because someone lifted at the last second. A figure in reflective strips led a bicycle along the edge of a level like a dog, learning not to pull. The elevator took its time and apologized by arriving with silence. The lane repeated the courtesy. Click in the cabinet, loop green, bar up, pause, finish. She saw the scallop again, the shallow curve in dust along the cut, the suggestion of a bumper line easing to a stop, exactly where a human driver would place a car if they were being careful not to get yelled at by a tired attendant at 3 a.m. You can see a shape without seeing the thing that casts it. Language does that too, so do doors. She reached for the lane phone, listened to dial tone again because some nights you need to hear a clean thing that does not ask. She set it down. She slid the side window open 2 inches and said, in a tone you might use with a neighbor whose cooking always smells better than yours, "You can pass, don't pause, not loud, not brave, just plain." The next lift obeyed. No shin-height hesitation, no extra breath held at the top. The arm went up, stayed long enough to be respectful, and came down. The cup barely remembered. The quarter declined to perform. It wasn't contrition, it was comprehension. On level 4, the white van's door panel cooled and gave one soft pop like a knuckle undone. A pigeon practicing morning before morning cooed and changed its mind. The booth clock tried on 3:00 a.m. and found the fit acceptable. The heat above the city lowered itself 1 inch, enough that the back of Ava's neck understood it had permission to be skin again. Most nights, the worst thing about a haunt is the tone, the way the room insists on being the loudest voice. This one didn't. The garage had decided to be a good listener. The lane was improving under instruction. You could live with that. You could sleep after that, you could work, which is all she wanted, is all. She added one more test that wouldn't haunt her in the morning. A paper receipt, already printed, already paid, torn clean from the roll. She slid a corner under the counter so an inch hung in the lane breeze, white against grey. Money speaks fluent air, paper spells it out. The next rise coaxed that inch forward and let it lie back down. No grab, no show. A nod. Then the arm returned to its cradle like a curtain finishing a play nobody was going to review. The intercom clicked again, the red LED bright, then a 1-second tail after release. That was the habit now, like a person who always says bye twice and then stops because the second wasn't necessary. She could have laughed at the politeness of it. She didn't. She let the room keep its dignity. Dignity is a currency you spend carefully. A woman in scrubs came down the stairwell, ponytail loose, hands empty, face in the shape of someone who had been kind for too many hours. She headed for lane 6, flipped down her visor, checked eyes she could not change, and drove out when the arm told her she could. Ava nodded as she passed, and got a nod back that meant thank you for wearing the same hour I'm wearing. 2 women on different sides of glass, practicing a language too tired to perform. When the place was empty again, the moth returned to the plexiglass. It walked, not flew, tiny feet finding traction where wings had failed. Ava gave it her breath through her nose, one gentle fog, so the moth would know the window was a window and not the sky. It turned and settled in the corner as if accepting advice. Another rise, another ring, another bar up, down. She let herself stand with the counter edge, pressing a single line across her hips, a harmless little pain that helps the mind draw straight. The quarter did nothing. The cup declared itself a mirror and then a cup. The receipts freed corner learned to be still. Above her, a RAV4 rolled along 5D, eased into reverse without the drama some people assign to reverse, and corrected a crooked park nobody except its driver had noticed. Ava felt her heart warm an inch for that. Competence is tender at night. She could have called maintenance already, but she wanted honest behavior before a second pair of eyes changed the room's mind. Machines lie less to one witness than to two. People are the opposite. She gave the lane more chances to be itself. At 3:14, the loop did a quick little blink, green, grey, green, too fast to wake the motor. A test squeeze, a hand under a faucet deciding if the water was the temperature it asked for. The plate camera took one frame on its own and saved 20 feet of concrete, crisp and plain. She looked at that photograph longer than the others because it was so proud of its nothing. Sometimes the truest image has no subject at all. It has a time stamped in the corner, and that's enough. The next full rise was different by a hair, and hair is the unit that matters when you live with machines. The green open lamp over the lane brightened to that mink shade she'd noticed last night, and held it a half-second longer, as if the filament had been told a secret. The arm completed its arc in a single sentence, no comma at shin height, period. Soft, rubber kiss, silence. She found herself saying it again, softer now, the way you speak, when a sleeping child stirs. You can pass, don't pause. She didn't mean go away, she meant keep going. There's a difference. The room understood. Rooms usually do. The city offered its low benedictions. A late bus threaded through its own lights. Somewhere a bar back-loaded crates and counted without numbers. Somewhere else a siren started to talk and thought better of it. The garage laid those sounds down like coasters under glasses. Neat, practical, making sure nothing left a mark it didn't intend. Ava reached under the counter, found the box of chalk the day crew used to label cones and temporary directions, and took one stick, small as a cigarette and twice as fragile. She crouched at the edge of the cut and drew a tiny V on the concrete, point aimed at the sealant line. Not a challenge, not a trap, just a witness that would remember if something touched where nothing should. She sat back into the booth and placed the chalk beside the register, a white nick on black plastic. She did not tense up. She did not hope. Hope is loud. She waited, spine long, breath set to the pace of the motor when it chooses to be good. When the lane rose again, the chalk V breathed, one wing feathered grey, not smudged, not broken, just less perfect than it had been. The difference was as small as a hair, which means it was everything. She kept her posture. She kept the room. "Thank you," she said aloud, to the concrete, to the cut, to the air that had learned the most human of lessons, how to go through a doorway without making it about yourself. On 3, the Camry's alarm thought about hey, and decided the city wasn't dangerous enough to earn it. On 5, a rental SUV remembered Minneapolis and let Phoenix be what it was. The moth slept like good punctuation. The cup settled to full silence. The quarter waited with the patience only metal and cashiers learn. Behind the glass, Ava adjusted the receipt printer a hair, because the world asks you to be a little more square every time it proves it can be. She rested the pads of 2 fingers on the counter, not pressing, just present. The vein at her wrist cooled again, that square penny of skin telling her the room had stepped forward without stepping in. It was not a threat. It was a handshake with gloves on. Night horror, when it behaves, gives you hours back you didn't know you could own. She had one now. She intended to spend it like someone who had learned the rule that made this place possible. After midnight, you can share a threshold with something you don't see if both of you remember your manners. "Good," she said, soft as a key. And the garage, pleased to be taught how to be gentle, breathed like a house at peace and waited for the next honest car. By 3, Phoenix turned its volume down to the click of insects and the low seam of air that hangs over a city before dawn. The garage settled into long breaths. On level 5, a rental SUV exhaled through plastic. On level 2, the little red Miata slept with the confidence only a car that never causes trouble can afford. Lane 6 kept its honest rhythm: ticket, plate, lift, thanks, goodbye. Lane 5A kept a different time, as if it had learned a private metronome and preferred to practice alone. Ava felt the shape of the hour in her shoulders. Nights have shapes, some like corners, some like corridors. This one was a threshold, a door half open, air laying a hand on the room and then taking it back. The white arm in 5A had stopped performing. It had begun behaving, which is more unnerving in its kindness. It lifted the way a person nods when they've decided not to argue. It lowered as though it enjoyed being correct. She didn't call anyone yet. You don't invite a second pair of eyes until the first pair understands what it's seeing. She stood, sat, stood again. She leaned toward the lane and let her gaze rest there without hard focus, the way you watch rain, the way you listen for a child in another room. The cup sat in its circle of sodium light, smooth as a coin. The chalk V waited with the patience of a mark that believes it will be needed. The quarter, head now where tail had been, pretended to be a still life and almost got away with it. The next rise came without fuss. Inside the cabinet, the small click. On the monitor, green. At the bar, a polite inhale and a curving lift. No hesitation at shin height now. The lane had accepted the instruction: you may pass, do not pause. The water made a single ring and forgot it. The chalk V breathed a hair and held the shape it had been born into. The quarter did not move. The arm returned to the cradle with a softness that made the rubber lips sound like a secret being kept. That's how Ramon found it. He arrived with coffee on his breath and patience in his knees. Maintenance men wear patience differently than anyone else, slung like a tool belt, ready to be used. His name stitched on his shirt gave the moment permission to be recorded in a real book later. He leaned into the booth window and let the glass translate his voice into a softer version. You want a witness or you want a fix? Witness first, Ava said, quiet as a handshake. It listens. He let out something between a laugh and a nod. Then we listen back. He stood in the lane and did not insult the loop by trying to trigger it with bone. He gave the room his weight without planting it where the machine would mistake him for metal. He crouched over the black sealant and studied the faint riser of dust along its edge, the ridge a broom never quite takes because it, too, believes thresholds should hold a line. You marked it? He said, seeing the chalk. I asked it to be honest, she said. It prefers that. Ramon fetched a narrow steel plate and a floor jack from his truck, small, ordinary things that have learned to be extraordinary when asked. He set the plate over the cut with the tenderness of a man tightening a child's skate, lifted until steel kissed concrete, and gave the room the kind of weight it had been asking for all night. The monitor glowed green. The cabinet breathed its click. The bar thought about rising and paused because she had the motor sleeping for safety while they were this close. Count me, he said. She did. The seconds were good seconds, steady, neither sulking nor rushing. When he let the jack down, the green softened into grey, the way ocean turns back into a surface after it's been disturbed. He gave the loop the weight again, a little longer. The room answered the same way. He didn't use words like calibration or tolerance, he said. Feels like a careful driver, and she loved him for that. He moved through the quiet like someone who had grown up inside machines and learned never to throw a voice into their ears. He opened the plate camera's small weather housing and breathed a neat, warm breath across the board to loosen the dust. He reseated a tiny connector with the same 2 fingers you use to pick a crumb off a sleeping baby's lip. He closed the cover and patted it like a shoulder. It wasn't superstition, it was manners for metal. They watched 5A lift through emptiness again. Ramon didn't search for drama. He watched the water, the chalk, the quarter. The arc of dust along the cut lifted in that scallop she'd seen before, the suggestion of a bumper line, a low car easing into a correct stop. He nodded once. It's choosing to be a car. The pedestrian intercom clicked its relay once, the little plate near the gate thocking like a knuckle on hollow wood. The red light came bright for the breath of a syllable and went out. Ramon turned his head like a dog. "You hearing that with it?" he asked. "Every time it minds its manners," Ava said, "it clears its throat and leaves the room." He tilted his chin, storing the fact where men like him store the weather. "Cosign," he said. "Two systems that never met agreeing to dance." The phrase made the hour fit better. He had brought a handheld meter with a coil and a tiny screen that translated field into numbers. He swept it above the sealant line, along the cradle, over the cabinet face's old screw heads. Numbers stayed reasonable, like a body admitting it had a temperature but not insisting upon fever. He listened with his fingers, which is all a meter ever is, a permission to call your fingers smart. "Day shift will want boards," he said finally. "Boards make them feel like they can vote." "Let them," Ava said, thinking of clipboards and phrases like false positives. "Night will keep the count." He squinted at the quarter. "You always use money when you talk to doors?" "Money alters behavior," she said, and smiled enough to make it a joke and a rule at the same time. He grinned. "Then let's pay attention." She added a second quarter, a hand's width away, not a fence, just company. 2 coins made a thought. The next rise turned the leading coin a click and left the follower untouched, like a person nodding to the first and showing respect to the second. "See?" she said. "I see," he said. He did one more thing, because men like Ramon always do one more thing, with a tenderness that looks like repair and is actually care. He laid his open palm against the cabinet door and waited there with his eyes half shut. The relay breathed against his skin, a soft pulse in metal. "Okay," he told it, in the tone you use with a good dog who has started to bark at shadows. "We got you." The garage answered the way garages do when they're being good. It offered something ordinary so the extraordinary wouldn't have to shout. Lane 6 took an accord with the dignity of a courthouse clerk. Upstairs, somebody laughed too loud into an empty level and felt foolish and let the sound go. A bicycle moved along the edge like a promise kept. The elevator decided to arrive without announcing itself at all. Ava slid the booth window open 2 inches and spoke to 5A again, not in the language of command, but in the voice you use when you're leaving a room and want it to behave while you're gone. "You can come through," she said. "Don't pause. Don't lean on the door." The next lift answered with obedience. The arm rose in one sentence. There was no comma at shin height. The green lamp brightened to that warmer shade and returned like a blush that remembered it had work to do. The water stayed almost flat. The chalk breathed, a single feathering along one wing. The quarter declined to perform. Obedience is stranger than rebellion in a place built for rules. It makes the skin at the back of the neck take notice with gratitude and something like grief. Ramon rested his elbows on the counter and watched her watch the lane. "You ever think about how much of our job is teaching rooms to mind their tone?" he said. "All the time," she said. "People think we fix things. Mostly we talk them into remembering what they already know." He liked that. He liked it enough to let silence make space around it. Night smiled and took some pressure off their lungs. The intercom clicked once more, the small red eye giving its steady 1-second tail, as if to say that's enough now. Ramon nodded to no one and said, "I'll swap boards tomorrow, let Day wear the cape. But if this were mine, I'd leave 5A a lane to pray in." Ava tucked that into her pocket-sized theology. "A door that needs a minute," she said. "Fine, we can afford 1 minute a night." Lane 6 caught a pair of girls with glitter on their cheeks and a laugh they tried to keep down for no reason at all. Ava sent them out with a soft, "Take care." They said, "You too," and meant it. The arm in 6 dropped with a thud that sounded like competence and mercy hiding behind plastic. Ramon wiped a smear off the cabinet face with the corner of his shirt and didn't apologize. "I'll write it clean," he said, which meant he'd use the phrases that let people who hadn't been there keep their dignity while not understanding. He gathered his jack and his plate, but left them in the shop 2 doors down from habit and hope, the way a man leaves his boots by the door when he believes the rain will come back. Ava stayed with the lane. She put the cone in the center so a real driver wouldn't misread the light as invitation. She kept the motor asleep and let the loop do its private counting under the concrete. She looked at the chalk V and the 2 coins like a version of a constellation only she and the hour could name. The next pass arrived with a shy new thing sewn to it. The arm motor didn't make the full rise hum. It made a middle tone, a polite nan, not movement, not rest, the voice of a hinge, thinking. At the same instant, the plate on the pedestrian intercom thrummed almost imperceptibly against its own screws, a vibration you feel more in the teeth than in the ear. The red light did not come on. It didn't need to. Sometimes a room nods and you know. She gave the lane 1 sentence more. "Don't hang in my doorway." It felt right. The words were a good coat on a cold morning. Simple, easy to shrug into, lining smooth against the ribs. The bar answered with a shorter dwell, as if thanking her for grammar. They stood like that, woman, maintenance man, booth, lane, inside a minute that understood the work. No one raised their voice. The air carried instruction and brought back obedience like a well-trained dog. The water quieted. The chalk preserved its small wound. The quarter kept its face. Ramon scratched his chin and lifted his brows, a face that said he was going to leave before he said something patient men don't say. "You call me if it stops being a gentleman," he said. "It won't," she said, and realized she believed it. He left like a person who doesn't like to break the spell of a room when it's behaving. His keys stitched to small music down the stairwell. His truck outside turned over with a low, grateful sound, and the city accepted the note into its low chord. Ava was alone with 5A again. Alone, but not lonely. The arm made peace with its cradle. The loop did not sulk. The cabinet clicked once like punctuation, not alarm. She slid the window shut and let her reflection return to the glass, the outline of a woman with ink on 2 fingers and a face that had learned to keep a room from waking the part of the night that bites. The next car at lane 6 was a nurse with a sandwich in a paper bag, the kind of bag that keeps company because it rustles like a dog's ear. She paid and said, "Thank you for being here," and drove into the hour like a person taking a deep breath you can't hear but somehow feel. Ava watched her taillight shrink into the street and wished the world had more of that kind of leaving. When 5A rose again, it did so with the smallest act of generosity. The green lamp softened as if to avoid startling anyone who might have been asleep nearby. The arm finished without the mid-bar thought. The chalk V sighed into itself and stopped. The quarter, still life, still, became less important than the fact that the lane had decided it no longer needed to prove anything. That's what the night had been after all along. not spectacle, agreement, a door and a person, learning how to share a boundary without bruising it. She closed the little side window and rested her fingers on the counter, not because she needed the wood, but because the wood remembered how many nights like this had passed through its varnish and stayed. Her wrist cooled again in that square of skin where nerves write their reports. The cool said, "Seen." She nodded to it without moving. You don't spook a good animal when it's finally come into the yard. Up in the booth clock, 3:30 arrived and set itself down like an elder at a table. The garage, pleased to have been taught how to behave, kept its appointment with quiet. Ava let it. She didn't chase the last proof. She didn't pull the coin back into the drawer yet. She just stood in the lane of a city that had decided to be tender and said softly, to the hour and the arm and whatever learned her voice, "Good." The building, happy with that single word, listened to itself breathe. Outside, the sky tested the idea of paler blue and tucked it away for later. Inside, 5A remembered not to pause, which is the kindest thing a door can do. And for the rest of that stretch of night, the white bar lifted only when it had to and rested clean in its cradle, like a promise kept by something that didn't owe her anything and yet had decided to keep it anyway. Day has a way of arriving like a manager, clipboard first, apology second, certainty third. At 9, the sun struck the east face of the garage and pulled a shine from the dust, as if polishing it for inspection. A supervisor in a blue polo arrived with a grin built to make problems smaller than paperwork. He read Ramon's log and skimmed the paragraphs Ava had dared to write the night before, the kind of lines that try to sound like electronics and keep their heart out of it. "Easy," he said, which is how morning says I wasn't here. "We'll swap the loop amp, the relay card, the plate cam board, sensitivity down 2 notches. He tapped the cabinet with the back of a knuckle, like knocking on fruit at a market. "False positives," he added, as if naming a thing ended it. Ava nodded because the right answer to daylight is yes. Ramon nodded because patience wears uniforms too. They pulled the face of the cabinet and bled static with the old ritual, wrist strap, ground clip, lips pursed like prayer. Boards slid out and in with the modesty of dull knives. The arm chuffed and rose on command, like a soldier being told at ease and remembering he still wanted to be liked. The plate cam rebooted to a smug splash screen that had nothing to do with lanes, then remembered it was a lens. The pedestrian intercom LED blinked once for the sake of theatre, then behaved like civic duty. "Call me if it persists," the supervisor said. And the word persists did not know that was a compliment at night. He left with the sun in his back and a checked box in his soul. Ava's shift ended at 2. The apartment gave her a narrow nap, the kind you fold and put on a shelf for later. She dreamed of quarters rolling edge-on down the ramp and never falling, a little circus that never needed applause. When she woke, she felt the faint cool at her wrist and knew the skin had memory independent of the person. At 10, she returned to the booth. Heat no longer radiated, it suggested. The concrete held yesterday's arguments with less conviction. She greeted Luis with a chin tip. He answered with a wave that asked you good, and offered a coffee with the gravity of an oath. Ramon had left his jack in the shop, not laziness but an intuition, the kind of neighbor who moves away after a single hard conversation never left anything worth returning for. 5A didn't feel like one of those. Ava did not rebuild the coin fence. She hadn't needed spectacle before, and she wouldn't need it now. She slid the little window open, set the styrofoam cup where the arm's shadow ended, and drew a fresh chalk V where the black sealant line met the lane. She pressed her Sharpie gently against one wing of the V so the pen's light weight would show any breath that thought it might be a hand. She closed the window. She wrote the time and nothing more. 2:43 back on shift. Fresh boards. Cup. Chalk. 2:57. The minute that had chosen itself the night before passed like a polite guest who decided not to knock. 3:02 went by with nothing in its pockets. Ava deliberately let herself believe the boards had done their trick for exactly 3 breaths. On the 4th, the pedestrian intercom thocked its relay with a library cough. The red LED lit held 1 second after release let go. The loop tile on her monitor remained grey. The arm motor slept as if coached to. She said, "Hello," to the door that wasn't open. She said it quietly, because the night respects quiet. 3:19 gave her a test squeeze. The loop tile blinked green and then grey, fast as a blink you try to pass off as dust, too brief to rouse the motor. The plate camera snapped once on its own and saved a gorgeous, pointless photograph of empty concrete, the colour of daylight in a city that can't remember winter. There's a pride to perfect nothing. It almost made her laugh. Luis leaned a cup onto her counter. "Slept?" he asked, meaning the lane. "For a minute," she said, meaning the lane and herself. He nodded as if rest were a number they both took turns holding. At 31, the loop came up clean, held, and the new relay gave the same small syllable Ramon had felt through the metal the night before. The arm rose with slightly too much confidence, as if proud of being repaired. The green open lamp brightened to that mink shade and back. The cup drew 1 ring from centre to edge, a travelling punctuation mark. The chalk "Vi" held. The coin, she had allowed herself 1, a single quarter placed beside the cut like a witness, turned half a face and settled respectfully where it had started. 4 frames from the plate camera, each the portrait of restraint. "Here we are," she said, not to announce it, just to keep time with it. She let the arm rest in its cradle without touching her overrides. The room had learned manners. You don't smack a dog that sits when you call it. 337 Lane 6 offered her a couple in a dented Civic. Real plate, real money, laughter they tried to carry quietly so it wouldn't break. Ava smiled and slid them through. The world performed its original choreography. For half a minute that felt like grace. 342, the loop again. Dwell, 7, ripple, nothing else. The new boards had introduced a slight formality, pauses just long enough to feel like permission requested before granted. Ava warmed to it. Manners are company. Ramon texted from wherever men go between midnight and dawn. Boards won't change a rule that isn't electronic. Watch for cosigns. She put the phone face down because the screen was too loud for the room. She saved the words anyway. Cosigns. When 2 systems that never shake hands nod in the same beat. She had seen that intercom LED breathing with the loop's inhale, the green lamp blushing alongside a chalk feather. She indulged a risk then. She lifted the lane closed sign off the cone, slid the cone a foot to the side, and put power back to the arm motor. 5A wasn't opened. It was allowed, a narrow path through a room that had demonstrated it could keep its shoes clean. She didn't like the word invite. She chose allow. Allowing is a boundary with posture. 351:08, the loop lit. 351:09, the intercom thocked and went quiet, LED glowing for exactly the length of an apology. 351:10, the bar rose to shin height and waited like a person who believes their knock was heard. 351:13, it finished the rise, and 351:14 brought headlamps, real ones, sudden and eager, a RAV4 with a child seat, a parking pass ghosting the windshield. Habit is a ruthless god. The driver saw green on 5A and drifted toward it, the way a stream finds the lip of a spillway. Ava hit the right torque and let warmth lead the instruction. Lane 6, please. Thank you. She raised her palm at shoulder height, fingers together, the traffic whisper that says, I have you. The driver eased to a stop with her bumper exactly 1 foot shy of the cut, obedience in steel. The loop tile stayed green because the machine believed what it had already been told. The arm stayed up because the script had a spine. Ava smiled and guided the RAV4 across to lane 6 with the slow, sure motion you use with skittish animals. The driver smiled back, the grateful, tired kind of smile that says, I am happy to be told. When they were gone, Ava set the cone square in the heart of 5A, not a barricade, a reminder. Don't invite trouble to a behavior lesson, her grandma used to say, meaning teach only what you can hold. 3 to 50-70. The loop smoothed itself back and then coloured in again, embarrassed to be seen doing so. 402. Another pass, dwell 8. The room's politeness had thickened into a ritual. Ava could feel the pattern maturing the way bread finds structure in heat. Luis brought contraband, 2 empanadas in a greasy paper bag. From a place that believes in lard, he said, reverent. They ate leaning over the counter so flakes would fall where forgiveness lives. Supervisor asked if we can open 5A by 5, he said. Told him we'd ask the tenant. The tenant's paid through dawn, Ava said, surprising herself with the affection in the line. Boundaries with manners, he said. Courtesy with teeth, she answered, and he left with a grin for the people he was going to keep from making bad pictures on the roof. 411, loop, short. 418, loop, long. 424, loop, medium. The chalk fee feathered one wing and then refused drama. The lone quarter did a polite one-finger roll and returned. At 4:29:22, the new boards did the old trick. Arm first, the motor made that middle ning. The open lamp blushed, and only then did the loop light up as if called from the wrong wing. If this were a haunting that wanted headlines, this would be the jump. It wasn't. It was collaboration. Cosigns. You may pass, you may not pause, Ava said, because language stays best when repeated. The dwell landed at 6, obedient, neat, the length of an elevator stopping on your floor and opening to no one and letting you see the inside of a box that exists to say yes. The intercom LED stayed dark, but the plate itself trembled in its screws, a human tooth feel you don't hear so much as Grant. Somewhere else in the building, a relay nodded. Wires touched like strangers' coats in an elevator and didn't apologize. Ramon's text returned like a far bell. There it is. She didn't answer because the lane didn't like to be ignored by faces pointed at screens. 4:36, 4:42, 4:49, rise, ring, return. In their intervals, the ordinary world kept stepping over itself without tripping. A contractor's Tacoma idled in lane 6 while the driver typed a sentence, and deleted it and typed it again. A father spoke to a baby who slept or pretended to sleep. A cyclist apologized to his chain for something neither of them had done. Mercy is often this mundane. Ava tried the last experiment she would try this week. A single dollar bill, bent honest from some earlier pocket, clipped under the counter so 1 inch hung in 5A's breeze. Money is a liturgy. Rooms know their hymns. 4:54, the loop rose. The bill didn't flap, it leaned, the way a body does when it wants to hear without claiming the chair. The chalk smudged only enough to testify. The quarter obeyed its ethics. The arm skipped the shin-height comma and wrote a sentence end to end. Thank you, she said, because gratitude is the only magic that never comes due. Past 5, the city rehearsed morning. Birds practiced their scales. A jogger tested the stairwell's echo and decided it wasn't flattering. The sodium lights dimmed their courage to make room for the sky. 5:07, the loop slept. 5:13, one last knock, not insistence but etiquette. We were here. Dwell, 6, nothing dramatic, broke or begged. She put the lane closed placard back on its hook. Before her promised 6:30 because promises made tonight can be fulfilled early if both parties understand each other. She rubbed the Sharpie dot from the quarter's rim and dropped the coin into the drawer with all the other deals people make to leave. She wiped the chalk away with a damp towel the day shift used for spills and remorse. She poured the cup into a planter by the stairwell where some manager had tried to make kindness photosynthetic. "Not keeping the proofs?" Luis asked. "He saw them," she said, meaning Ramon, meaning the lane. "Now I'm being a good neighbor." They watched the ramp glow. The city put on its day voice and cleared its throat. The concrete shed last night's heat, the way a body sheds fear after it decides not to be hurt anymore. Ramon rolled in a little after, leaned on the cabinet like a friend on a porch railing, and said nothing useful, which is a kind of courtesy when the truth has already been told. "Think it comes back?" Luis asked. "Yes," Ava said. "Not because it needs to, because we kept our manners." "What do you call it?" he asked, eyes on the lane, not because he doubted, but because names make rooms manageable. "A door that knows the hour," she said. "A rule that remembers people." He nodded the nod of a man who will store a line in the place where jokes and prayers share a drawer. She left a note for Swing. Leave 5A closed after dark. If it asks, let it pass. No pausing. Paper rules still rule. Places built on rules. She counted her drawer to the dollar and put 2 fingers on the rubber lip where the bar sleeps. Cool, dustless, honest. "Don't hang in my doorway," she told the arm and the air and the hour that was already learning to become tomorrow. Then she added the half of the treaty that makes treaties worth anything. "And I won't in yours." She stepped into a morning that hadn't earned the right to judge the night and walked across a sidewalk that would burn by noon. Behind her, Lane 5A kept an appointment book only the dark could read. Little dwell numbers and quiet rings and the name of a woman who had treated it like a neighbor. In the cabinet, the brand new relay clicked once, small, honest punctuation at the end of a sentence that had decided to be grammatically correct forever. Some horrors require blood, some require attention, some, rarer, require manners and will give yours back to you with interest. 5A was that kind. It did not change Ava's life. It made room in it. And on nights after, when the loop woke at 2:57 or 3:11 or whenever the boundary wanted to practice being a boundary, she would lift her palm to the glass and say the words that had taught a door how to behave. "You may pass, don't pause." And the door, happy to be spoken to like a person and not a problem, would say yes the way good doors do by opening and then remembering to close. Some nights teach rooms to mind their tone, a platform that learned to breathe without arriving, a lane that learned to open and not linger. If you listen long enough, you start to hear which places keep time for us. Doors, rails, ramps, and bells. Especially bells. A bell decides nothing on its own, metal, rope, air. But at 1:19 a.m. in a stone tower that should have slept, something remembered the old pull. Providence after midnight is a city of careful windows and brick that holds the day's heat like a secret. On a side street lined with elms and stoops the colour of worn copper, St. Bartholomew's sat shouldered into the block, stone on stone, iron hinges older than anyone who still argued about the roof. The nave kept its breath. The apse smelled faintly of beeswax and old lilies, the kind that insist on being remembered even when no one brings them anymore. Outside, A raccoon made the exact amount of noise a raccoon makes when it knows the alley is its, and the hour will protect it. Up in the bell tower, just under the louvers where night air becomes a square, the rope lay tied off twice around a cleat, old sailor's habit. 2 turns, a half hitch to be sure, and the bronze waited the way bronze waits, calm because it has all the time in the world. The last honest ringing, weddings and funerals and Sundays, had moved to a small electric hammer years ago. The real pull had been retired when the parish council ran out of knees and volunteers. The clapper slept against the lip, a patient mouth unwilling to speak without a hand. Marta kept the keys now. Not priest, those days were behind this parish, but keeper of doors, watcher of thermostats, payer of plumbers, folder of bulletins. Nights like this, when she couldn't sleep, she came to the little office off the side aisle and counted paper candles and envelopes, a soothing arithmetic you do when the world won't sit down. She liked the quiet of the place when only the exit signs glowed and the red sanctuary lamp above the tabernacle kept its low heartbeat. She liked how the nave held her steps and gave them back to her honest, no echo thrown in to make her feel smaller than she was. At 1:17 a.m. she made a neat stack of bulletins and set a paperweight on them, a glass sphere with a bubble inside, gift from an usher who never stopped trying to make the world kinder. She touched the lock on the sacristy door, a habit, and looked up toward the transept where the tower ladder disappeared into a square of dark. The hush up there had a different weight to it, like the soundproof blanket you put over a too bright thought. Outside, the wind did nothing fancy. It turned one elm leaf and put it back. On the street, a lone taxi took the corner like a person who trusts the map, even when the map forgets them. The city stretched its shoulders and cracked one vertebra. Distant, the bridge. Marta didn't hear the first thing with her ears. She felt it with her teeth, the way you feel an approaching truck in your molars before it shows itself. A small vibration in the stone, once, then gone. Not the heating system knocking, she knew that family of sounds by name. Not the elevator in the rectory, retired like the rope. A tap, transmitted through old granite, up where the bell hung, small as a coin dropped on a table upstairs. She stood still because stillness is how you argue with panic. She waited for the second thing. It came as air, just a touch, the nave breathing in as if a door had opened far away and decided not to tell anyone. The glass bubble on the paperweight showed a shy tilt and corrected itself. At 1:18 she unlocked the tower door, not to go up, just to feel the habit of the key, the way teeth find their way home. The iron latch moved like a knee that used to work better. She put the key back on its ring and said aloud, because stone likes voices that know their own names, "Not tonight." It wasn't a command, it was a treaty with whatever the hour thought it was doing. The second vibration came cleaner, like the last step before a person climbs onto a wooden floor, the huff of weight, the polite correction of balance. In the nave, one of the votive racks clicked, the smallest metal against glass, then stilled. The red sanctuary lamp did not flicker. It never did. That was its job. At 1:19 a.m., the tower remembered its work. There was no warm-up, no little slap from the electric striker practicing modernity. The bronze spoke once, one full-bodied toll the size of a room, rolled through the rafters, and went on its way into the neighborhood like a story told loud to people who didn't ask for it, and somehow needed it anyway. Not twice. Not the slow roll of a funeral. One. The after-sound hung in the stone for a breath, and then climbed, as bells do, into a sky that could hold it. Marta watched the rope through the open tower door and saw exactly what she expected to see. Nothing. The hemp line hung where she had left it, 2 turns around the cleat. half-hitch snug, tail end straight as a promise. No sway, no tremor. The knot said still. The bell said I have been rung. She didn't run. She walked the centre aisle to the first pew and sat, because sitting is a way to make a building choose its tone. The pew sighed its old sigh under her. The stained glass along the south wall caught enough streetlight to look awake. Her hands remembered how to fold themselves without being told. Outside, 2 window lights across the street blinked awake. A dog barked once, not in fear. Roll call. The city listened to itself for a beat and decided to keep sleeping. In the office, the bubble in the paperweight made its small correction again and held. Up in the tower, the rope tail lifted the barest inch and lay down, the way a sleeping child adjusts a blanket in their dream. Once, Marta said, to the air, to the stone, to the hour. Not a rebuke. A count. If the story wanted spectacle, it would have sent 3 more tones and let her pretend to chase a culprit up the ladder. It wanted something else, recognition maybe, or the small dignity of a craft not quite retired. She stayed where she was and let the last of the bronze die out against the ribs of the building. Only when the silence re-established itself as the proper owner of the nave did she stand. She closed the tower door, turned the key, and laid her palm against the wood for a second longer than necessary. There are nights when a hand on a door is both a benediction and a boundary. On her way back to the office, a draft found the hem of her coat and lifted it a fraction, polite as a friend asking a question on the porch. She answered it by straightening the coat and setting the glass sphere back in the centre of its ring of paper. The bubble inside watched her like a small eye and did not argue. The city held still, the church held stiller. Whatever had pulled, the past, the habit of hands, the hour itself, returned to wherever it keeps itself when no one is watching. Marta made a note on the pad she kept near the phone. 119 Wuntol, rope tied. She underlined nothing. She dated nothing. She tucked the pen under the pad's cardboard back and waited to see if the building would choose another sentence. It didn't. Not yet. The line had been delivered, a single bell in the middle of a block where everyone swore nothing surprising ever happened, which is how night likes it. Surprise with manners, proof that fits in your pocket. The tower had kept its hour, the rope had kept its knot. Next, the presence that remembered the pull would offer small proof in the daylight's shadow, and a reason to keep listening after the clocks give up. Morning came the way it always does to old churches, sideways, through coloured glass that remembers stories more brightly than the people who told them. St. Bartholomew's took the light like a compliment and made no fuss. Brick warmed. The nave aired itself. The red sanctuary lamp kept its little heart. Outside, a mail truck talked to the curb and moved on. Marta returned at 10 with a ring of keys that sounded like duty and a thermos she promised herself would be the last coffee for the day. She hadn't told anyone about the toll, not the neighbours who asked after her roses, not the deacon who liked to audit thermostats, not God, in so many words. She had written the single line on her pad and slept after dawn because sleeping is a vow you keep for your body when the world has asked too many questions. Proof first. That was her rule, learned from a father who repaired radios by listening to rooms. She started where stories usually choose to lie. In the tower stair, light slid down stone like water. Dust patterned the steps in a thin skin that remembered every shoe. Marta set her hand along the rail, not to steady, to learn. The iron felt clean cold, no recent warmth from palms. On the third landing, she stopped and crouched to look at the place where years of feet had taken the edge off 2 steps and not the one between. Pigeon prints turned themselves into hieroglyphs along the window sash. No fresh droppings. Nothing scrambled. If the bell had woken pigeons, the tower would say so without malice. It did not. At the room with the cleat, she waited a breath before unlocking the door. Patience is a tool. Inside, the rope hung like a line down a well. 2 turns around the cleat, half hitch, snug, tail neat. The hemp had the shine of old sweat in its twist, from hands that were now photographs. She touched it with the back of her fingers and felt what rope always says when it has nothing to hide. Fibre, friction, the slow ghost of palm oil. No heat, no sway. Above, the bronze told again, in memory only. One resonance still held in metal if you knew where to put your ear. She didn't climb to the headstock. She had her weight and her dignity to consider. But she could see the clapper through the slotted grate, a dark pair sleeping against the bell's lip. It lay against the east side. A hand-pulled swing would have thrown it west, then let it come home. The electric hammer, a little striker on a bracket, sat an inch clear of the shell, unplugged, per the council's decision last Advent, to go manual when needed or not at all. The plug still wore the little blue painter's tape she'd put on it the day they voted. Untouched. Mechanics next. A retired sacristan had shown her once how the bell's wheel in its cradle could be pushed a single tooth of rotation by a strong arm and a stubborn idea. She looked for marks on the oak, fresh rub, new polish in a circle the size of neck bones. What she found was old honesty, dark, smooth arcs from 100 feast days and one place where a teenager had carved initials and repented by sanding them out. No bright scrape, no new bite. Good, she said to the empty room, because rooms like to be told when they've done nothing wrong. Down in the nave, sunlight through St. Cecilia's blue robe laid a square on the second pew. Marta sat there and listened to the building finish waking. The boiler belched once in a far register. The exit sign hummed its small b. The bubble inside the glass paperweight in her office looked content, as if it had chosen a posture for the day and would not be corrected. Around noon, Mr. Hahn from the corner grocer came in with a bag of votive candles he donated every month. His voice always sounded like a soft broom. "The bell last night," he said, placing the bag on the first step and wiping his hands as if flour lived on them. It had not been a question. "You heard it?" Marta asked, already knowing the answer from the way his eyes had more awake in them than usual. He made a face that said, of course, without impoliteness. "One," he said, and held up one finger because fingers help when words might be told to hush. "I thought, wedding? No, I thought, time? No, I counted my breath and it was one." "No car alarms?" she asked. "No truck?" Providence has noises it sometimes tries on at night. She preferred the ordinary culprits to be given their chance. He shook his head. Raccoon made trash art. A tiny smile. But Belle was Belle. He left the candles and a jar of hard candies for the CCD class that would eat them like sacraments. And he left her another small thing. Confirmation without embroidery. When people see the same simple, they are kin for a day. At 2, Deacon Arturo came by to check the collection counter and make sure the candelabra at Mary's altar had been refilled after Sunday. He had a comb-over, a precise pen, and the gift of taking every joke as if it were a prayer. When she told him the bell had spoken once, he said, "The timer?" Out of habit, and walked to the breaker closet like a man walking into a confessional. The old timer wheel on the wall had been silenced years ago, its teeth taped. He twirled it anyway, and listened to the non-sound. "Nothing," he said. Then, a beat later, "You know that," without a trace of condescension. He was good at not stealing a person's proof from them. They went together to the tower room so his eyes could have what hers had had. He pinched the rope above the cleat. He sniffed the air like a dog for the smell of ozone from a short. He looked at the gap between the hammer and the bell, at the blue tape on the plug, at the dust that had settled evenly on the bracket's arm. If it were wind, he ventured, we'd have gotten the windows singing. He looked to the louvers. No curtain of plastic, no loose slat. Nothing that would fake a hand. He surprised her then by putting his fingers on the old wood of the bell wheel, not to move, to bless. He didn't cross himself. He didn't say a word. He closed his eyes the way a man does when an old song finds him uninvited and kind. When he opened them, he looked younger for a blink. There was a funeral here in '79, he said. I was altar boy. The rope burned my palm, I was so nervous. It rang once at the end because Father liked that. One toll. I thought it meant everything. Marta tucked that into the box where she kept reasons not to be afraid. Memory is a machine too. Old uses maintain a current. They made the small talk of co-workers who both know when to abandon it. He left her with a spiral-bound repair ledger for the year, plumbers, roof, the stubborn light by the sacristy that swallowed bulbs like pennies. When he was gone, she didn't open the ledger. She opened the pad by the phone and added a second line, not to correct the first, but to accompany it. 10 current, rope still tied, striker unplugged, wheel clean. She underlined nothing because underlining dares the universe. Afternoon shook itself, and the church practiced being a public building. A woman with a stroller came to sit in the shade and teach a baby to chew air. A man stood by St. Joseph and talked to him like a brother about a job. Teenagers came to take photographs because the way the light fell on brick made them feel like they had discovered old Europe. A nun from a retirement house brought 2 friends to see the windows and tell them, in whispers, which saint did what like she were assigning chores in a celestial kitchen. A sparrow got itself confused and needed 15 minutes and 3 kindly hand waves to locate the square air again. The bell did not comment. Evening rolled its blue cloth over the city and left a neat edge of pink along the river to show it had been here. Marta locked the side doors, left the main ones on their latch for any tired person whose feet would find them, and retreated to the office to count candles and fold bulletins again, because repetition comforts the honest. She set the glass paperweight back in its circle. The bubble did its small tilt and held, the way people do when they have decided their posture for the night. At 12:41 a.m. she heard the first little thing, the tower clearing its throat through stone. Not a sound, a suggestion of weight. At 1:03 the nave drew a breath you could blame on a door down the block if you wanted to be unkind to wonder. At 1:14 the votive rack ticked once, as metal remembered warmth from hands that weren't here. At 1:18 the rope tail in the tower lifted the width of a fingernail and lay down, as if a sleeping child had turned in a dream. At 1:19 the bronze spoke again. 1. Full and dignified, no smearing from a mallet, no chop from electricity. A single human bell. The sound rolled along the rafters the way soup steam rolls under a kitchen ceiling and made a clean path out the louvers to the square of night beyond. It crossed the street and touched a bedroom window and changed nothing and changed everything. Marta did not look at her watch out of habit. She looked at the nave clock because sometimes you must be instructed by a face that has always belonged to the room. The long hand rode the 4, the little hand lived between 1 and 2 like a person in a doorway who knows where they're headed. She counted 3 heartbeats after the sound left the stone. Then she stood and walked to the tower door, and put her palm against it the way she had the night before. Cool, calm, uncomplicated wood. She opened, looked, and saw rope, cleat, half hitch, no sway. She smelled rope, dust, the faint beeswax that old wood welcomes and keeps. No ozone, no hot motor, no apology from any mechanism. She went to the ladder's first rung, set her hands on it, and decided not to climb. Decisions have music. She liked this one's. Back in the office, the bubble in the paperweight looked the same. The pad by the phone took a second line for the night, like a collection plate takes the quiet coins of people who have already given what they could. 119. One toll again. Rope still. She stepped into the nave and spoke a sentence into air that had learned how to carry it. Once is a hello, twice is a habit. She didn't mean warning. She meant, I hear you, choose your manners. Outside, a neighbour's porch light winked off again. Mr. Hand's building kept its windows dark as if accepting instruction. A cat walked the church steps like a bishop with soft paws and sniffed the iron rail where 100 hands had shown their oils and their prayers. The cat declined to be moved by theology and went away. Marta stood in the centre aisle, directly under the place where tower becomes nave and nave becomes promise, and she felt the old building do the simplest thing a place can do. Keep time. Not the digits on a clock, not the schedule on a bulletin. Time as in we were, we are, we will be, and here is a single note to prove it. She answered with the only currency a person owes a room that behaves. Thank you, she said, as if the bell were a neighbour holding a door, and the church, pleased to be given a job again, rested its stone on its stone and asked nothing in return but that she come back tomorrow and mind the rope with her eyes, not her hands. The day after would bring skeptics and small accidents and edges of reason that cut a thumb if you hold them wrong. Tonight, the proof sat where anyone with the right hour could see it. A tied knot, an unplugged striker, a clean wheel, 2 tolls in 2 nights at 1:19 a.m., and a woman who knew the sound of a hand on metal, even when the hand is memory. The habit was set. The hour had chosen her. Next, the bell will offer the kind of evidence you can argue with and lose, while the neighbourhood learns what it means to live beside a single true note. Word doesn't travel in a straight line in a neighbourhood like this. It diffuses through stoops, grocers, and the pauses on sidewalks where people decide whether to ask what they already know. By the third night, half the block had nothing to say about the bell and said it with interest. Marta did not post or tell. She set the table the way a person sets for company they're not sure will knock. Proof first, always. A light dusting of chalk at the cleat where the rope tied, just enough to record if a fibre moved through it. A slip of onion skin paper tucked at the half hitch like a hair across a doorway. If it fell, it would fall honestly. On the floor by the tower door, a penny on its edge. If stone shook, it would lay the coin down without apology. In the nave, she placed her glass paperweight dead centre on the pad, so any tilt would show as a little moon off-centre in its bubble. None of it was spectacle. All of it was the sort of evidence that behaves in daylight. At 10, Deacon Arturo arrived with something that looked like a calculator had married a brick. From the university, he said, pleased and apologetic at once. A sound level meter, borrowed. I told them calibration fees and they smiled like scientists. He set it on the second pew. We can at least write a number next to our ears. They practiced with organ notes, quiet pulls, a C that made the meter yawn around 58 dB. Outside, a bus bullied past. The screen climbed and came down obediently. At midnight, the deacon left the meter on its tripod, tiny red light blinking like a heart you'd trust in a storm. "Text me, yes?" he said at the door, and made a face that said he would not sleep anyhow. At 12:53, Mr. Han came in with a take-out cup and a napkin under it to keep the knave innocent. He sat 3 rows back on the left like a Catholic who remembered when that meant something, and folded his hands, which meant everything tonight. Down the side aisle, a grad student from the physics department, Julia, from her email, pretended not to notice the sacred and busied herself with the meter. She was the kind of skeptic who stays because she knows leaving looks like fear. "You can sit," Marta told her, "because even instruments need posture." Julia sat on the aisle, one hip perched like a bird on a rail, thumbs over her phone. The first little thing, always a little thing, was the tower breathing through stone. The penny by the door stayed on edge. The onion's skin at the knot did not slip. The bubbling glass tilted a hair and returned a shrug. Marta did not look at her watch. She looked at the face of the nave clock and let it deliver its slow minute, the way a good reader turns a page. At 1:19, the bronze spoke. One toll like a room deciding to say its name. The sound level meter bloomed to 84 dB and held its little digital breath 1.2 seconds longer than Julia's app expected, based on her earlier C note. "Decay is wrong for a hammer," she muttered despite herself. "It's cleaner. It blooms before it falls." She made notes too fast to look like faith, and too careful to look like dismissal. From the street, one dog's reply bored as attendance. From the apartments, a single window clicked on, then off in a gesture that said yes, heard. From Mr. Han, a smile that paused halfway, because someone taught him to respect moments. Marta went to the tower door. The penny lay down. The onion skin paper had fallen, soft, honest, half on the flagstone, half tucked under the cleat like a note from a child passed in class. The chalk on the rope's turns bore a faint smudge, not scraped, feathered, exactly, where a line moves when something, however slight, draws it taut. The knot remained neat, the tail lay where she had set it. She took a photograph not to evangelize, but to keep from doubting herself at noon. Julia swallowed. Could a pressure wave from something move the top of the rope without untying? She hated the shape of the question even as she offered it. "Yes," Marta said, "it could." She looked up through the grate where the wheels sat dark against the bell mouth. The clapper still kissed east. The little electric striker still sat unplugged, blue tape clean as a conscience. "What about pigeons?" Julia asked, scientific in the only generous way science knows, by asking to be contradicted. "Sleeping," Marta said. If they were forced, the stare would say so. She would show her, later, the undisturbed dust skin on the treads, the window sash hieroglyphs. For now, she let the tower keep the dignity of having good tenants. By mid-morning the next day, proof began to accrue where it could embarrass no one. The meter's printout, a cheap thermal strip, spooled a rectangle of jagged black where silence had been sore teeth. 84 dB at the mic's position, with a decay curve that looked like a shoulder and a sigh. Julia overlaid it with a data point from a hammer strike test she coaxed out of a retired sacristan at a different church. The striker's curve fell faster, chopped, she called it, almost like a cough. "This one," she tapped the midnight profile, "is a hand, or something that mimics the swing of mass coming through air before contact. You can see the pre-attack bloom right here. Deacon Arturo, unexpected mathematician, sketched a bell's period on the back of a bulletin with his precise pen. If the bell's radius is, 40 inches? The swing period, we could estimate." He did. The numbers he wrote arrived where the meter's shoulder lived. "I'll behave," he said, as if he'd done something rude, and put the pen down. An electrician from the diocese came in toward afternoon to reassure everybody by turning a tool belt into confidence. He checked the breaker closet, the bell's bracket, the old timer wheel with the tape bandaged over its teeth. He sniffed for ozone and found only beeswax and dust. He traced a finger along the striker wire as far as it went before air took over. "You got no sneak path," he said. "No phantom feed. If it rings, it's not through my jurisdiction." He said phantom with the mild eye roll of a man who had given up policing words. "And wind?" asked Julia. "Points awarded for stamina?" He stood in the nave under the louvers and listened to the day go by. Flags, buses, children on scooters, and shook his head. "Wind makes a hissy little choir. Your note's a sentence. Wind doesn't shape sentences." In the grocery between plums and parsnips, an older woman told Mr. Han that in 1966, Sister Agnes had allowed the bell to sound once. At the exact minute, a man from the parish came home from Vietnam and stepped onto his mother's porch. Mr. Han accepted that like a coin. True or lucky, it still bought something. Proof you can argue with needs a different tone than proof you can claim. On the fourth night, Marta gave it a chance. She ran twine from the rope's tail to a soft bell on her desk, one of those cheap silver ones that only hotels and jokes use, so if the rope moved while she sat, paper in hand, the bell would tell on the tower. She chalked a whisper-thin line across the knot itself, not to challenge, to witness. She set a shallow dish of water on the stair landing at knee height, the sort of place a rush of displaced air would confess without breaking anything. She taped a sheet of onion skin to the cleat, so its lower edge just kissed the rope, the faintest flamenco of paper waiting to flutter. She unlocked the narthex doors and left them on the latch. If the neighborhood wanted to audit the hour, let it. A man without a job counted the church steps and found them honest. A nurse in scrubs paused on the sidewalk and felt the stone through her soles the way she used to count heartbeats through latex. A kid in a hoodie sat on the curb with a phone aimed at nothing and something, the tower's louvers making the square of dark that instructs imagination. At 12:58, a patrol car whispered past, the officers practicing non-existence. At 1:05, a pair of students from the dorms walked by and said, "Haunted," the way you try on a jacket in a mirror and decide you look like someone who has a story. At 1:12, the twine on Marta's desk gave a small, thoughtful tremor that did not rise to the dignity of a ring. The dish on the landing showed one oval and came back to a circle. The nave clock lifted its long hand toward the 4, the way a polite person lifts a finger to say one more thing. At 1:19, the bell gave its 1. The desk bell chimed, half-hearted but true. The chalk on the knot parted not in a scrape, but in a soft separation, the way lips open to a syllable. The onion skin barely fluttered and then fell, obedient to gravity and story both. The dish's water moved out and back in a single, gentle breath. The sound meter, blinking its board red, filled its own little memory with numbers that made Julia quietly delighted at home. Mr. Han stood by the first step and cried without making a sound like crying, just water standing where eyes keep their promises. He wasn't remembering a war or the sister who lit a candle for him in 83. He was thinking of Wind and Proof and the one he lost last year, who had insisted that Sundays be kept even when work does not. He didn't say any of that. He drifted down the steps as the sound died and said to Marta simply, "Thank you for letting it." She didn't say I didn't. She didn't say it lets itself. She said, "Thank you for standing," and meant it. On the 5th day, a man from the city came with a clipboard that had once felt important to him. He had the gentle arrogance of professionals who would rather be teased than wrong. "We've had complaints," he offered, like a question he hoped would be answered with laughter. There had been none. "Good," he said, disappointed briefly. He did the dance, wrote down the make and model of a bell cast before his birth, asked after timers, eyed the unplugged striker as if it were a teenager caught with a cigarette. He signed nothing. He folded under Marta's gaze the way good bureaucracy does when met by dignity under stone. By then the habit had learned to be polite, even to schedules. A rainstorm proved that weather had nothing to do with it. The bell still spoke once through wet air that slid down stained glass like careful hands. A blackout proved the grid didn't own every noun. The nave went dark except for the sanctuary lamp, and the bell kept its appointment with the hour like a neighbour who doesn't need porch lights to find your door. On the 7th night, Julia brought a friend from acoustics who carried a case that could have been a violin if violins liked math. He set up a couple of mics and a little grey box and apologized to the saint beneath whose window he balanced it. He was tender with wires in a way that made Marta like him. "If we catch the pre-attack air," he said, "we can prove a swung clapper versus a struck shell." "You want to prove a hand?" Deacon Arturo said from the second pew, not unkindly. "A movement," the friend corrected. He wore the correction with humility. They recorded a minute of everything that was not the bell, and then the bell. Later, on Julia's laptop, lines bloomed that a person could fall into if they didn't watch their step. You could see the faint shiver before the main note, the breath before a voice, air pushed aside in sympathy for the sweep of mass. Not a hammer, not a striker, a swing. "And the decay," Julia said softly, almost reverently now. "The decay is human." The word hung in the office like another paperweight. No one wanted to touch it in case it rolled. Marta touched the rope. She tied and untied the half-hitch to make sure it remembered the knot was not the point. She left the onion skin aside that night. She left the penny lying down. She poured the dish of water back into the sacristy sink and kept the habit without the proofs. "We don't have to interrogate you," she told the tower, and the tower, which had learned manners from her, did not argue. Other habits formed quietly. A porch light across the street began to blink at 1:18 and off at 1:20 for no reason anyone would claim. A jogger who used to pass at 1:30 shifted their route to the far block between 1:15 and 1:25, as if time could be given a respectful shoulder. A cat that had leapt the rail every night without ceremony began to sit through the single toll and leave only after the last shiver left the stone. One skeptic, every neighbourhood gets exactly one, stood on the sidewalk at 1:17 with arms crossed and a face set to prove it. He flinched at the note and pretended he had shivered because of a breeze. The next day he told Mr. Han that resonance could be induced by bus traffic if the bus were heavy enough, and Mr. Han said, "Of course," in the tone you reserve for customers who ask where you keep honesty. Inside, the ledger filled with normal line items, roof, mice, a hinge on the sacristy door that didn't like humility. Nothing about bells. Marta kept her pad by the phone and added lines without flourish. 1 toll, 1:19, rope still. No pigeons. Decay long. When she ran out of paper, she didn't keep the old sheet. She folded it and pressed it under the glass paperweight and let the bubble watch both weeks at once. On the 10th night, the bell paused. It gave nothing at 1:19 and a thin panic rose, ridiculous as it was, because the body is a metronome that hates being ignored. Marta waited 2 breaths longer than a person comfortable with themselves would. She heard in the stone a small shift, like someone planting both feet before a second try, and then the note came at 1:21 late, but within the kind of courtesy the hour had learned to practice. Relief is silly and human. She let it be both. "Thank you," she said aloud. because even agreements need praise. And in the quiet after, proof offered its kindest face. A boy, 10 maybe, appeared at the end of the aisle with his mother's hand in his. He'd dragged her in the second the main doors were unlatched by someone else's need for prayer. He wore a T-shirt with a dinosaur pretending to be tired and hair that had argued with the day. He tilted his head toward the tower and whispered, loud enough for anyone to be allowed to hear, "It's the same as Grandpa's watch." "What is?" his mother asked, indulgent, half embarrassed to be the mother of an evangelist. "The bell," he said, with the clean cruelty of children who are not confusing. "It says we're not late." Marta pressed her fingers into the wood of the pew to keep from kneeling at the theological thoroughness of that. She did anyway, because kneeling is sometimes gratitude with knees. The boy's words were proof a meter couldn't give, not just sound measured, but meaning metered, time kept for people, kept by something that should have been retired and had decided against it. She rose and smoothed the pad on her desk and set the glass sphere back exactly in its circle. The bubble sat in the center, as if all the arguments had been polished out of it. The rope upstairs made no sound, which is also evidence if you let it be. The cleat held the half-hitch the way a palm holds a small truth. The bell waited for night like a teacher who has stopped standing when students enter, because they have learned to say hello first. All this lived somewhere between faith and physics, but not in the slick place where those words pretend to fight. It lived where manners live, in how you touch a door, in whether you pause when asked not to, in if you say thank you to a note that keeps the hour even when clocks have given up. Marta locked the side door and left the main on its latch. She turned off the office light and left the sanctuary lamp to do its work. On her pad she wrote one more line she didn't show anyone. If it wants to mean something, let it. She slipped the paper under the glass and watched the bubble agree. The bell now had a habit, and the block had a pulse. Next, the hour will choose its witness, and the pull, whatever it is, will ask for a favor only a person can grant. Nights that keep their promises begin to feel like family, predictable in the way you're grateful for. By the second week, neighbors timed teeth-brushing by the toll. Delivery drivers started using St. Bartholomew's as a landmark, right at the church that says goodnight. And the patrol car slowed at 1:17 out of habit and respect. The bell had become a sentence in the neighborhood's language. Marta let it be that, and nothing more, until the night it asked. It was a Monday that had been heavy on paper and light on people. Rain came through town with the attitude of someone late to a party, sloshed a little, apologized on the way out. She closed the side doors, left the big ones on their latch, and made the nave look like a stage dressed for an understudy. Simple, ready, honest. The glass paperweight sat on her desk. The bubble inside had found a center. It now seemed reluctant to leave. At 12:58 a.m., the tower breathed through the stone. At 1:07, the rope tail lifted the width of a fingernail, a sleeping child turning. At 1:16, the votive rack ticked, a little metal memory. She stood in the center aisle, palms on the back of a pew, not praying, not. The exit sign hummed its soft B. The sanctuary lamp kept its red heart. At 1:19, silence, not absence, pause. Her muscles noticed before her ears did, a tiny tightening, as if the building had stepped to the edge of its line and looked down. 1, 2, 3 heartbeats beyond the usual. She set her breath to even. You don't teach a room to calm down by panicking at it. Then the voice arrived, and it didn't come from the bell. It came from the stair. Footfalls, slow and careful, weight placed where weight belongs if you learn to climb here from a person who made you do it right. Not boots, not sneakers. Leather that had known polish long ago and didn't resent not being shined anymore. A hand along the rail, felt rather than heard. Each step said present and for you and don't be afraid in a grammar made of friction. Marta moved to the foot of the tower stair. Not up. Down is where treaties are made. The iron latch on the door smelled like old pennies and rain. She didn't open. She set her palm to the wood and said the sentence that had become hers in these weeks. Once is hello, twice is habit. Then she added, because the night had earned her courtesy, "What do you need?" The next step answered. Not up, down, one, then another, until the presence reached the door and paused, the way you pause on a threshold you've owned and left and still love. She could feel it in the hinges, not cold, not warm, a patience that tasted like beeswax and hemp, and 1,000 hands that had made Sunday become Sunday. "Show me," she said, and took her palm off the door. She opened it and let the stair stand, full of itself and empty of bodies. The dish she sometimes kept on the landing for air had been left off tonight. No ripples confessed. The dust on the treads, still that thin, honest skin. The penny on the sill she'd set days ago lay flat. Some proofs don't need to stand up to be proof. She climbed 3 steps no more. It felt like respect. There on the 4th, something waited that had not been there. An old prayer card, edge curled, St. Bartholomew on one side with his knife, and the beatific stare of a man who knows the worst and remains polite. On the back, handwritten in a looping parish script that had survived bulletins and raffle sheets, 2 sentences, one toll for the leaving, one for the arriving. Keep the hour. No date, no name. Ink browned by time. The card smelled like the drawer you keep elastic bands and wills in. Marta carried it down into the nave and set it on the front pew. "I'll keep it," she said to the room. And the room, pleased to have its instructions spoken aloud, relaxed by a degree. The rope upstairs moved in its knot, the way a sleeper tucks the blanket under their chin. She did not need to guess at the favour. It sat there in ink. Not ceremony, service. One bell at 1:19 had been hello to the neighbourhood, proof without bruising. The second bell, the one that hadn't come except on the late night at 1:21, was a request, not for drama, for addition. To mark not just we are here, but someone is crossing. But who? Providence keeps lists without writing them. Mr. Hand's niece was due on Thursday, a baby who already had a name in 2 languages. The woman in scrubs had a father with a heart that had been bargaining for more time. The boy with the dinosaur shirt had a grandpa whose watch ran slow and a smile that suggested he'd wait. 2, Marta said to the pews. 1 for leaving, 1 for arriving, only when asked. The last words weren't in the card. They were in her. She made 2 phone calls the next day that felt like lighting candles without flame. One to the hospital chaplain she knew, just a hello that wasn't a hello, a reminder that if anyone wanted a note at 1:19, there was a bell with good manners and a parish without fuss. One to Mr. Han, call me when the baby decides, framed as a neighbour's curiosity about timing and nothing more. She told no one else. She taped the card under the desk drawer, where her fingers would find it whenever doubt asked to be indulged. At 1:12 that night, the patrol car did its quiet pass. At 1:15, the nave filled with the kind of stillness old buildings wear when they know nothing will be asked more than they can give. At 1:18, her phone hummed twice. Mr. Han, here, no emoji, no detail, enough. She stood under the tower and said the sentence into the stairwell with the dignity of a woman placing silver on a table. 1 for the leaving, 1 for the arriving. She did not specify names. You don't attach proper nouns to sacraments the city provides for itself. At 1:19 the bell gave its one, full, round, ordinary miracle. The sound had the same shoulder and sigh, the same pre-bloom and long decay. The sanctuary lamp trembled exactly not at all. The nave clock was honest. She waited the way an usher waits after the procession, counting people by instinct, counting beats by breath. The stair offered nothing theatrical. The rope tail never left the cleat's decorum. The air did what air loves, which is to carry. And at 1:21 the second toll came, not louder, not softer, different only in the way the building held it, like a second teacup brought to a table that already had one, no clatter, no apology. Out on the street a porch light flicked on, then off, early this time. In the apartments, a woman woke without worry and didn't know why. Mr. Han texted a single character, nu, which meant girl, and did the job of an entire poem. Marta sat in the pew and let the bell finish inside the stone. She didn't put it in her pad right away. She held the sound the way you hold a hand on a threshold, warm, brief, consenting. When she did write, she used the same clerkly hand she used for candles and plumbers and roofers. 1:19, one toll. 1:21, one toll. Rope, still. Favor, granted. News does what news does. It learned manners from the bell. No article, no blog post. A barber mentioned it while trimming a beard, and nicked no skin. A bartender raised his chin toward the church at 1:18, and customers lowered theirs without being told. A lapsed parishioner stopped by the nave at noon the next day and left a $5 bill under the glass paperweight without notes or promises. The boy with the dinosaur shirt told his friend with precise cruelty, "We're not late," which covered more metaphysics than he knew. 2 nights after, the hospital chaplain called at 12:51. "If it's not trouble," he said, and he meant the opposite. A woman in the oncology wing had asked for the sound a church makes. Not confession, not sacrament, just a bell. "At the hour you keep," he added, because he had been listening. She loved bells. She taught children how to ring them without jerking. Marta didn't say, of course. She said, "We'll keep time," and sat under the stair with both hands open on her knees. She spoke the favor as if it had been written in the card, though it had only been written in shared air. One for the leaving, one for the arriving. The leaving sounded at 1:19, the arriving at 1:21. In the wing, a nurse who had never liked churches said that was kind, and no one corrected him. After that, the bell asked less often. It didn't want to turn wonder into schedule. Some nights stayed single. Some nights stayed silent. A few, rare, carefully chosen, took the second toll as if borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor who never complains. The favor wasn't a policy. It was a courtesy the kind horror gives when it wants to live in the same city as love. On a Wednesday, with rain that couldn't decide, Marta stood under the tower and touched the rope with the back of her fingers. Hemp, dust, the slow ghost of palm oil. She thanked it. She thanked the cleat. She thanked the worst part of her week for leaving room for this. She thanked the card for deciding to be found. She pressed the paperweight's bubble to the center with a thumb and felt it return even after she let go. She turned off the office light. She left the sanctuary lamp doing its job. At the door, she gave the building the sentence it had taught her, the one she trusted more than any she'd ever learned in school. "We will keep the hour." The stone, happy to be given a job again, promised with its silence. Outside, in the kind hour just before dawn, Providence felt like a city that had agreed on something. Not doctrine, not data, manners. A bell that said 1, then sometimes 2. A door that knew when to open and when to close. Air that carried instruction and brought back obedience without being told twice. That was the whole horror of it. the whole comfort, that you could live beside what you can't explain if both of you remembered how to behave. If you've been with me through the night, thank you. We walked 3 quiet thresholds, a platform that breathed without arriving, a parking arm that lifted for no one and learned to lower when thanked, and a bell that remembered the old pull. If one detail stayed with you, tell me in the comments, your city, your local time, what you listened on. If these stories keep you company, wait until the end to subscribe, then tap the bell so the next file finds you softly. And if you're out late tonight, do me a favor. Stand 6 tiles back from whatever line is in front of you, put 2 fingers to the nearest door or rail, and say the sentence that saved everyone in these stories. You may pass, don't pause. I'll see you next time after midnight. Keep the hour.